Lord of the Mysteries, Fire of Destruction, Chapter 371-380. Monday, August 27, 3 p.m. Lindbergh time. Above the gray mist, in the Palace of the Giants. A lone figure shrouded in mist that made it difficult to make out his face stretched out his hand towards the crimson stars. 5 crimson sparkles appeared on the seats surrounding the bronze table the next second, and the hall came to life. Looking around as usual as she prepared to salute, Audrey Hall's eyes froze for a second as she saw that there was someone new, but this time, this person was on her side. "This new member will be joining us from now on, Miss Magician," Klein mentioned calmly, his posture relaxed, his cheek resting on 2 of his knuckles. Looking at Furs, he introduced the rest. "This is Miss Justice, this is Mr. Hanged Man. This is Mr. Sun, and this is Mr. Chariot. Thank you for receiving me." Rising from her seat, Furs Wall gave a curtsy, clutching the edges of her dress. "So this is the Tarot Club," biting down somewhat hard on the inside of her cheek, she could barely contain the trembling of her hands. While she was nervous, this was more from being in the presence of a god than before these mysterious members. Thanks to her new boss, who gave her a simple meeting summary, she knew that most of the members present were low sequences. No higher than sequence 7. According to his own words, she would be among the top 5 strongest members once she joined. Counting her, the total sum was 6. It was a newborn organization. "Where are you? Where are you?" Her blue eyes moved quickly and discreetly over the male members present. Finally, her gaze shifted to the far end of the table and opposite side, where a lone person was seated. This one wore a strange robe that covered his entire body, and although his figure was illusory, she could still easily see the long, bright red hair. The head of the figure staring at the ceiling boredly moved towards her for a moment and gave an amused nod, a familiar taut smile on his lips. Feeling an eyebrow twitch, Furs only let out an inward sigh. "Yep, that's him." Giving a glance, she returned her attention to Fool, not wanting to show they knew each other. A new member, and a lady this time. The spectator found herself happy, no longer being the only woman in the Tarot Club, but she didn't show that joy beyond a simple smile. She had been disappointed a few days ago after losing contact with the Beander writer Furs Wall and Zio Derecha, people she had planned to invite to the club. But that didn't matter now. A new member had joined. Her eyes took a good look at her. Miss Magician wore an elegant, somewhat expensive green going-out dress and a soft-capped lady's hat. Her hair was a soft yellow like cream, and she had an air of nervousness and anxiety. Her fingertips are yellowish, a common smoker. She is also not sitting still in her place. Someone who lives with a lot of stress and anxiety who uses cigarettes as an escape. Giving a simple diagnosis, Audrey gave an inward nod, but her brow furrowed slightly. The woman looked somewhat familiar. Perhaps if she saw her face, she would recognize her, but thanks to the fog, that was impossible. Returning to her usual motion and grasping the edges of her green dress, Audrey stood up, curtsied, and said happily, "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Klein, who had been stressed these past few days over money problems and the recent events with Chariot and was seeing things a little darker, felt his soul lighten and his heart relax at the happy noblewoman. He smiled and nodded, "Good afternoon, Miss Justice." A woman this time, what's so special about her? Mr. Sun is part of a continent of legends, while Miss Justice is part of the Loan Kingdom nobility, not to mention the background of Mr. Chariot. What extraordinary thing could she bring? Alger only glanced sideways at the new club member, debating what the woman's background might be. He thought all this over as he stood up and saluted, analyzing the new member as best he could. "Surely it's more important than mine." The man pursed his lips a little as he applied a little more force to the fist on his chest. He knew that was the truth. Compared to the others, his background was the least impressive. With those thoughts in mind and the greetings over, he spoke seriously, "I memorized 8 of the diary's entries. I'll hand over the other half at the next meeting." Looks like what Chariot said last time did hurt. Klein couldn't help but think that as he nodded. All right. If he was lucky, this time there would be more information about the tower and the mysterious transmigrator, or perhaps something to boost his image as the Fool. Though he preferred the former, he already got the latter last Monday. Seeing that no one else responded, Klein manifested the parchment goat skin and the red fountain pen, and after a while, he had the journal's pages in his hands. Taking a glance at the dates, the clown could only nod internally. None of these appeared to be repeat entries. Returning them to the order they were in, he began to read. The 16th of December. I managed to contact the pathetic fellow who's trapped in the storm and was lost in the darkness. He called himself Mr. Door and tried to teach me a complicated and difficult ritual. He wanted me to help him return to the real world and promised to fulfill 3 of my requests. Does he think I'm stupid? I've lived for more than 60 years over my 2 lives. Does he think I can't tell that this is the usual manipulation done by evil gods and devils? But the history of the 4th epic that he described was fascinating. I know of the most famous War of the 4 Emperors in the 4th epic, but the specific details and main figures involved are limited to the information spread by the major churches, for example, the Black Emperor of the Solomon Empire. It wasn't until today that this so-called Mr. Door finally answered my questions by letting me know who the remaining 3 emperors were. The half-insane Blood Emperor of the Tudor dynasty, the Night Emperor of the Trunsoest Empire, and the Underworld Emperor of the Southern Continent, also known as Death. According to Mr. Door's description, in this war that changed the situation of the entire world, the Black Emperor, Blood Emperor, and Night Emperor fell one after another. The Underworld Emperor reaped the greatest benefits. Although there was something he added as an additional piece of information, Mr. Door said that it was during this time that the hidden sage was born. Before I could question him about that, he went on to talk about Death went mad but also became stronger. Even deities can go mad. What a horrifying sentence. Ads by PubFuture. I asked Mr. Door if he had participated in the War of the 4 Emperors. If so, what role did he play? And what was the position the 7 deities maintained in this war? What role did they play? Mr. Door didn't answer my question. He only said in a teasing manner that the number of preeminent mighty figures in the 4th epic far exceeds my imagination. When he said that, I couldn't help but remember the strange way he had mentioned the hidden sage. His attitude was as if he had picked up an apple on the way, wholly disinterested and unimportant, just worthy of a short mention, as if it had just crossed his mind. Is it possible that he was part of whatever gave birth to this evil deity? To my bad luck, I couldn't get him to give me any more information about the hidden sage. He just continued with what he was saying before. He mentioned 2 laws, the law of Beander characteristics indestructibility and the law of similar sequence Beander characteristics conservation. The 29th of October. The leader of the secret order, Zeratul, visited me once again. He told me that he was a sequence 2, miracle invoker. Zeratul told me that the life school of thought specializes in astromancy, seeking to use medicine, music, light, wine, and fragrance to eliminate paths with unfavorable star readings in fate. They believe that disasters and diseases are caused by the loss of balance between man and nature and between man and his own mind. He added meaningfully that the life school of thought worships the moon. Why worship the moon and not go one step further, the Evernight goddess? The 18th of April. Matilda is pregnant, it's to be expected, and I can even tell you exactly which love-making sessions she conceived in, because I felt a decrease in my Beander characteristic. The 9th of February. I have a 3rd child. I named him Bornova. My eldest daughter, Bernadette, was lucky. Her mother and I were just low-sequence Beyonders back then. She is free to choose the path she wants to take. Klein found himself shocked and almost speechless. If it hadn't been for his clown powers, he would have been sure his mouth would have hung up long ago. The information on these pages was too rich. Not only did he learn the name of sequence 2 of his path, along with part of why he could resurrect, but he also learned the name of sequence 1. Miracle Invoker and Snake of Mercury. Those are some powerful names. Worthy of angels. There's also something about Mr. Door. Lost in the dark and caught in the storm, Evernight Goddess and the Lord of Storms. It was smart of me not to divine anything about him. Klein inwardly patted himself on the back for having been cautious and having avoided another incident like his sunburn. Chariot told him about this when he accepted the Scarlet Monarch's deal, about the family's specialty and what it stood to gain, about the path they controlled, their curse, and Mr. Door. One of the reasons he had accepted Furs so readily into the Tarot Club was that Mr. Door, a very possible angel, had a connection to the Abraham family, a 4th epic angel family that controls the path of the apprentice. A path that, in high sequences, made one able to travel between worlds. If there was a way to find the way back, Klein was sure that this traveling path was one of the necessary pieces. Putting aside his success in obtaining information, he looked at the names of the Emperor's children. Bornova, Seal and Bernadette. Zeratul gave Russell a prophecy about each, with one of them being about his daughter turning her back on him, resenting him. What a sad prophecy. Klein couldn't imagine hearing that his children would grow up resenting him and turn away from him. Of course, it's not like he ever stopped to think about whether he wanted to have a family. He didn't even have a girlfriend when he was still in his home. It also seems that the Emperor is really curious about the hidden sage, and he believed that Mr. Dorr had a lot to do with his birth. Clicking his tongue internally, he would have to write this down to check later. With another member in the club, he could feel his spirituality wearing off rather quickly. In 9 more minutes, he would not be able to hold the meeting and would have to cut it short. With time against the clock, he released the journal pages that disappeared as soon as they left his fingers and looked up calmly. What is it that you desire, Mr. Hanged Man? Alger shook his head, his gaze downcast and his head slightly hung. I have no questions, Mr. Fool, I would like to turn them into contribution points. All right. With those final words from the Fool, the time for exchanges began. I'm looking for a Southern Varano's brains and an oiled Rusk's venom. Does anyone have either, or can you get them? Adrian was the first to make a request. His sudden voice surprised some. Those were the main ingredients of the Sequence 8 robot potion. He already had the ingredients for the monster potion ready, now he only needed the ingredients for the next potion. If I take what happened with Jerry as an example and as Klein described a demisol, I'm sure the monster potion will melt in his mouth. The redhead thought, a smile forming on his lips. I've got a contact who can get the brain. Alger didn't take a second to respond. I'll need a few days to contact them, by the first days of September, I can get it. Deal. I'll be waiting for you, Mr. Hanged Man, with a foxy grin, Adrian said, amused, causing the man's eyebrow to twitch. I have the venom of the oiled Rusk. How much do you need, Mr. Chariot? Audrey replied. 15 milliliters will cover it. What do you want in return, Miss Justice? 200 pounds will be enough. I will send you the venom once this meeting is over. Audrey said calmly, not needing anything else at the moment. That reptile venom was not difficult for her to obtain nor very valuable. In her home storage, she easily had 15 different types of animal venom. Deal. Adrian laughed a little, having someone rich as a member was the best. Luckily, these ingredients aren't too strange. One advantage when the formula of the path is so well guarded, and the beyonders on it are so rare, is that you don't need to hide and trap every creature there is. Having a few of them is enough to control a good farm. He wasn't surprised they were easy to obtain, it was only logical. Ads by PubFuture. Watching the quick exchange of materials and deals before her, Furs was a little taken aback. This was the first time she had seen such a meeting, let alone participated in it. Feeling inspired by the moment, the writer quickly made her own request. I'm looking for the crystallized blood of a Lavos squid and a pair of terror demon worm's eyes. Does anyone have any information on these? Now that they were following this madman, money was not a concern, so she could afford to see her friend's last missing ingredient to advance to Sequence 8. I've seen the pair of terror demon worm's eyes at several pirate auditions. One isn't too far away. I can get it for you. Alger grabbed another deal, a streak forming. Adrian glanced sideways at the man, one eyebrow raised in amusement. Looks like someone is insecure in their position. Oblivious to his thoughts, Alger turned to Justice, his gaze serious. I managed to find a seller for the rainbow salamander's complete pituitary gland, he's interested in selling it for 500 pounds. Derek Berg watched all this from the sidelines, unsure how to get involved. Because of where he was, he had no way of getting materials to the hands of the other club members, even if he wanted to. The only thing he could get from them was potion formulas and some information, which was also all he could offer. This frustrated him greatly. Watching all the excitement unfold on his game plane, the clown couldn't help but feel quite fulfilled. His gaze passed over each member, ignoring one, until it ended on the youngest. Noticing how tense he was, Klein could get an idea of what might be bothering him. Don't worry, Mr. Sun. After this meeting, your value here will increase even more. As soon as there was a moment of silence, he raised a finger against the brass table. Tap tap tap. All noise died to the familiar tapping, everyone's attention moving to the seat of honor at the top of the musty bronze table. Mr. Fool is going to say something. Audrey let out a soundless sigh and opened all her senses. Alger tensed for a moment. A revelation from Mr. Fool. Did something happen? Nodding dismissively, Klein focused on the group. I need your help to make an attempt. An attempt? Audrey was immediately excited. I'm willing to cooperate. As a spectator, she clearly remembered that Mr. Fool had only used the word attempt twice. Once when Mr. Hanged Man, Mr. Chariot, and she were brought into this mysterious space, and once when he gave them an honorific name for a prayer attempt, revealing his true nature of God. What will it be this time? It's something to look at, Audrey thought happily, a sweet smile on her face. It was not only a new attempt that was sure to be a success but also a new member. The Tarot Club was growing. I don't understand what's happening here. Furs found herself at a loss. Everyone suddenly fell silent to listen to what the fool wanted to say. An attempt? For what? She wanted to turn to look at her boss for answers, but remembering his request, she could only wait and see where this turned to. Attempt. Alger tensed even more, his suspicion growing. What is Mr. Fool trying to accomplish? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Sighing internally to calm his heart, he nodded. Your wish is my wish. Beside him, Derek looked at the Hanged Man, then at Justice, wondering why they were so sensitive about this supposed intent. At least I'm not the only one confused, the young giant thought as he watched Miss Magician share his doubt. His eyes then moved to the farthest member of the group, to the only other member besides the fool, who looked on calmly, one cheek resting on his palm. Hopefully one day I can be as calm as you, Mr. Chariot. Derek thought with admiration. The blessed of a god, most likely speaks often with him. Someone who takes on missions personally commissioned not only by his god but by Mr. Fool. Someone with power and fearlessness who throws himself headlong into danger. Someone who can be counted on. The Chariot was everything Derek wanted to be. As if sensing his gaze, Chariot turned from the fool to him. The young man could only lower his gaze, somewhat embarrassed at being found out. Come back when you're 30. Adrian looked flatly at this, hoping it was just admiration or respect the young man was showing. He returned his attention to the chair of honor, not wanting to think about it now. Klein continued the plan, saying, this attempt will make your transaction easier and safer and will be confidential enough. Looking at Justice, he smiled. Do you remember the ritual to summon Mr. Chariot's messenger? Yes, I do. Audrey nodded gracefully. It was hard to forget a bone bigger than your leg. Following his plan, Klein made no further explanation. He nodded solemnly and said, my idea is for you to sacrifice an item, whichever one you wish, to me through the ritual. Can that be done? Audrey thought in astonishment. She very quickly recovered and understood the advantages of this method. Once this attempt proved effective, they could make deals and trades with Mr. Sun. She could see how Sun himself came to the same conclusion by the huge smile on his face. Mr. Fool is great. As expected of our Tarot Club, we will be different from other organizations. We will use the method of the gods to change materials and ingredients. Audrey was about to think, praise the lady, but stopped herself. After some consideration, she thought, praise Mr. Fool. Isn't that how the Scarlet Monarch receives and sends materials? Furs thought, remembering the events of a few days ago and unable to avoid making a comparison. She was confused for a second before brightening. Of course, the Fool and the Scarlet Monarch are allies. It's not uncommon for some of their methods to be similar. Klein described the process of the ritual he had confirmed, but he added extra things like oils and powders, all to enhance the ritual's mystical and mysterious image, which in turn enhanced his image. After confirming that the attempt would take place half an hour after this meeting to regain his lost spirituality along with the new 3 p.m. Lindbergh time, Klein leaned back, letting the club go on a little longer. At this point, Adrian decided to begin. The red-haired man turned to look at Audrey, his gaze heavy. Miss Justice, I have a mission that requires your help. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. A mission from Mr. Chariot. What kind of event is it this time? Something to do with the Rose School of Thought? No, it wouldn't be that. Miss Justice is too weak to take them on or even spy on them. It has to be something he reckons she can deal with. A job where a spectator works. Alger's mind raced, multiple possibilities being born in rapid succession. Whatever Chariot had planned, it had to be something considerable. he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed that he wasn't chosen for it. After the excitement of a possible way to negotiate with Sun, the young noblewoman's defenses were down, so she couldn't help but cringe a little at the sudden voice addressing her. As a spectator, Audrey immediately recovered and took a calming breath. With crystalline eyes, she looked at the robed man. "What is this mission about, Mr. Chariot?" She didn't know how to take this, so the best move was to enter calmly. Smiling at the young woman, Adrian gave a gentle nod. "It's a mission that requires your skills, and if you know how to take advantage of it, I'm sure your digestion will speed up." Emerald gems sparkled even brighter. Audrey quickly understood what the man was trying to say. A chance to act. Controlling her excitement, the noblewoman took a breath. While the opportunity was there, she knew she couldn't just dive in head first. Not only did she need more information about what she could gain, but she also needed to know what dangers there may be. "What's in it for me, Mr. Chariot?" Adrian grinned with all his teeth. "The psychiatrist's potion formula. How many formulas does this guy have? Are you that spoiled? Being the blessed of a god is so good." With a bit of a headache from his rapidly depleting spirituality, Klein couldn't help but groan at the silver spoons others were holding. The formula of Sequence 7. Mr. Chariot had it all along. Is he also part of the psychological alchemists? If not, I don't understand how he has so many formulas. The image of Chariot became more and more turbulent in the eyes of Alger, who gritted his teeth. The man was a complete mystery. Every time he seemed to know more about him and could paint a better picture, Chariot would come up with something completely new and brazen than before that would demolish every image he had. I may know his real name and appearance, but who's to say that's not a trick too? The blessed of the gods certainly are terrifying. Psychiatrist. It's the one following Telepathis, Sequence 7. Audrey felt her heart racing and a little cold sweat trickling down her back. If the payoff was a Sequence 7 potion formula, then the mission had quite a considerable range of danger. It's all right. We have Mr. Fool with us, a true god. There is also the Scarlet Monarch. The danger level is still acceptable. With two gods behind them, though they had yet to meet one of them, there wasn't much Audrey felt she had to worry about. If anything, the only concern would be paying for help if she needed it, but even that was something she could tolerate. She was a Hall, after all. Justice's answer came quicker than she wanted it to and with a little more emotion. "What is the mission about?" "I need you to assist one of my men in revealing Ambassador Bakerland as a spy for Intis," Adrian said, his eyes glinting with mischief. Furs looked at her boss, somewhat confused and stunned. When she was still in Backland, thanks to her status as a famous writer, she attended several nobles' parties, so she sometimes met the man and had an image of him. The most she had noticed was that he was rather bold and flirtatious. Bakerland. Audrey froze a little, at a loss for words. Bakerland Jean Maiden, that womanizer was a spy. At her confused look, the redhead nodded, and he's not just a spy. You could also consider him a terrorist. Several of the incidents that destroyed the relationship between the nobility and the rich were his doing. The rumors inciting the public to rise against the government were also his fault. I must say he has guts. Making so many attacks against the government being in the heart of the kingdom takes someone with several screws loose. With a chuckle, Adrian ended up rolling his shoulders in disinterest. Although, now that he thought about it, Bakerland and him were, in some ways, complete opposites. Curious. At his words, he earned stares from almost every club member, who just looked at him as if he had sprouted other heads and arms. Though none as hard as Magician, who stared at him open-mouthed. Is this a case of two sides of the same coin? Remembering one of the lines she wrote in her book, Furs closed her mouth, but her gaze was stunned. Look who's talking. Klein barely held back the urge to roll his eyes but managed to stay strong. While the ending had thrown him for a loop, what the man had said was somewhat disturbing. So all these recent problems are because of you. What a despicable man. Audrey squeaked in disgust. She never really liked Bakerland and even disliked him a little. Her father had warned her to be wary of the ambassador. While he looked like a dashing, good-looking man, he was, in reality, a lecherous man who liked the company of ladies. Married or not, he didn't care. Her disgust turned to contempt. The thought that such a man would cause a rift between the nobility, the rich, and the citizens in an attempt to attack her home made her heart burn with hatred. Ads by PubFuture. In her eyes, Bakerland Jean Maiden had just received the death penalty. And she had no problem acting as a witness. Audrey returned to the subject with a severe look. What do you need me to do? People with a heart of gold are, without a doubt, the easiest to do what you want. Smiling, Adrian nodded. It's easy enough. For the next few days, one of my men will be gathering information at the ambassador's residence. Of course, doing this on a typical day would be impossible. Not only because his residence is crawling with beyonders ranging from 2 sequence 5, 1 sequence 6, 3 sequence 7, and a combination of 10 sequence 9 and 8. It may be a little more but not much, but because Bakerland itself is sequence 6. That's where you come in, Miss Justice. His information channel is terrifying. To know all that about the residency of an ambassador. Alger was a bit shocked at how much the man knew. Maybe Chariot had a spy inside. How do you know all that? Klein found himself stunned. How long had he been planning this to have so much information about Bakerland's security? One couldn't just know that much. Furs was unusually still. If the spectator had been looking at her, she would have clearly noticed how she had turned extremely pale. If he wants to break into a residence and steal information, the best way would be me. I'm so dead. No, wait. Bakerland is in Backlund. Feeling her joy return along with her will to live, the writer laughed internally. That guy might be a madman, but he wasn't an idiot. He wouldn't make her accompany him to Lindbergh just to send her back to complete a mission. That would be stupid. It must be one of the members I haven't met yet. The swindler perhaps. She would be the most suitable for this. What do I go in for? To die? Audrey shivered a little, but letting out a sigh, she decided to dig a little deeper. I haven't agreed yet. If you want me to do something too dangerous, I can always refuse. Consoling herself a little, she spoke. What exactly would I be doing? From what you're saying, it would be extremely dangerous for me to participate. Oh, there is danger, but not as much as you think. Winking, he continued, as I said, it's suicide to go in on any given day. The best time to get the information would be at one of his parties. Parties? Wouldn't that be counterproductive since the security would be stronger? Audrey questioned, narrowing her eyes. Yes and no. Security will no doubt be more vigilant at the party, so it would be harder to move, but that's exactly what we need. Adrian smiled mysteriously. With so much attention on the parties, they won't put as much power inside the house. So my man will be able to move around more freely than he normally would. Your job will simply be to observe, to be the spectator at the parties, one more damsel who will act as the secret poison that will be their undoing. Watch each guard and analyze their movements and patterns. The same is true with Bakerland. You're a spectator, so I'm sure you can do it discreetly. You will notify my man when you see any change or if the ambassador leaves with any lady. Finishing saying the role the Tarot Club Bank would perform, Adrian couldn't help but laugh heavily as he remembered something. We have to thank in this what happened at Dutch Wilson's party in July. In a way, what the witches did that day will make this possible. Audrey looked somewhat astonished at the redhead, but while there was a considerable danger, she wouldn't be the one dealing with it. She would only be an informant, though informants usually have it the worst when they get caught. But she was confident in her ability to act. The plan, to her eyes, she found no flaws, instead only a problem. Mr. Chariot, how would I go about informing your man of a change of guard or that the ambassador is on the move? With so many eyes on the party, communication would be nearly impossible. The opportunities to pray would be few and far between, and if I did so too often, I would inevitably attract too much attention and be discovered, Audrey questioned worriedly. Instead of answering directly, Chariot asked her a question that froze her in her tracks. You have a pet, don't you? She'll be our ace, Susie. She's just a dog, she'd be found out right away. Audrey was barely able to keep from shouting avast, I refuse. How could she put her best friend, pet, in such danger? Noticing how pale she had turned, Adrian jokingly added, don't worry. I'm an animal rights activist, I just need her identity. What are you going to do? Take its social number and wear a furry costume, like that weird guy from Japan who thinks he's a dog? Klein inwardly questioned the weirdness of Chariot's plan, raising an eyebrow at how strange it sounded. Ads by PubFuture. After discussing the plan and the moves for a while, the mission between Chariot and Justice started. After a bit more, Klein gave the notice to change the meeting time to 3 p.m. A share a time and agreed that Justice would do the test in half an hour, so he adjourned the meeting for the day. The clown, just like the members' figures, disappeared back into his body. Opening his eyes, sitting on the toilet, Klein clutched his head and could only grunt at the pangs that assaulted his brain with discomfort. It was a good idea not to use the Smurf account. Creating an avatar takes a lot out of me. I have no choice but to advance to magician rather than do it. By advancing, the control I have over that space will be greater and won't impose as much pain on me. But I still need the money for the ingredients. Maybe if I pray to the Scarlet Monarch, he will be willing to give me the ingredients. No, I can't depend on the gods in these things. I'm not out of options yet. I must also show my investment value. Asking him to give me everything would only generate a bad image. Licking his lips a little, the detective left the bathroom and went to the kitchen to eat what he had prepared earlier. I will wait a few more days to pray to the Scarlet Monarch. I need his permission before I tell the Tarot Club that it's okay to pray to him for help. It shouldn't be a problem. When we made the deal, he agreed to be co-founder, which means he should have no problem taking on some responsibilities. Yeah, shouldn't be a problem. Lamponing a bit, Klein brought his cup of tea to his lips. Even though it was cold, the sweet taste of the brew brought a smile to his face. Blinking away the flashes of crimson that still haunted her vision, and after seeing that she was back in the room of her apartment, Furs could only let out a massive sigh of relief. I thought my heart was going to explode from fear. The writer mumbled, sinking into the sofa she was sitting on. Her dress crumpled a little. Don't be so dramatic, it wasn't that bad. A sudden voice beside her made her freeze slightly, her eyes widening. How could I forget that guy was here? The writer slowly turned around, her lips quivering slightly until her nervous sapphire eyes collided with amused scarlet eyes. Sitting on the other couch in her living room, wearing a simple white t-shirt and black trousers, with his long red hair tied in a high ponytail that left a few stray pieces framing his face, was her boss, Adrian Kenway. Well, did you enjoy your first time? I told you it wouldn't be so bad, the redhead whispered seductively, tilting his head slightly and half closing his eyes. Her eyes drifted down from the man's disgustingly handsome face, down his neck, and to his prominent chest. The shirt was cut in a triangle so she could see the line separating those mountains. To top it off, the shirt was somewhat see-through and tight, so she could see everything, and by everything, she meant everything. For a second, the writer's heart stopped. Furs could only swallow her saliva in embarrassment at such an undeniable sight. Her eyes went up from the V to the chest again, a comparison born in her mind. Those must be bigger than mine. If he leaned in a little, she was sure she could see See something you like, Adrian winked mischievously. As if he could read the best time to humiliate her, his boss chose just that moment to speak. Her head snapped up so fast you'd never think she was down, her eyes shaking. She raised her hands in defense and shook her head vigorously. I wasn't looking. A heavy blush rose from her neck to her face, which quickly turned red. Furs could only cover her face with her hands. What was that? I lost it for a second and... Arg, this is the worst. Crick. The sound of the open flat door reached her ears, shortly followed by footsteps. Crossing the short hallway to the living room, Zio Derecha raised an eyebrow. What's going on here? Ah, miss, what was going on is that? Nothing happened. Not wanting to suffer the look on her friend's face or listen to her boss find a new way to humiliate her, Furs raised her hand in alarm and snapped her fingers. Snap. A short flash of light accompanied by a sudden cloud of fog covered her entire body. After a few seconds, it dissipated, and the writer was nowhere to be seen. She had disappeared. Clap, 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 bravo, bravo, bravo. Clapping and whistling, Adrian rose to his feet in obeisance to the great escape the writer had made. A big smile on his face. The only thing the writer's escape had lacked to be equal to that of a certain mysterious uncle was fireworks and a little pink smoke. Other than that, it was a well-deserved 8.7 out of 10, with the expression on her face giving her extra points. Zio looked at him with a life-weary face, an expression already surrendered to his misdeeds. Maybe it wasn't a good idea to ask him to accompany Furs on her first day. Sighing, the policewoman took off her hat and hung it on the coat rack. Thank you for looking after her, she said. The smile on his lips shrunk a little until only the corners of his lips were turned up. Don't mention it, miss. Besides, teasing her is too much fun to pass up. Having successfully annoyed the writer, Adrian stayed a while longer in the curiously oriented duo's flat. Having changed his appearance to that of an ordinary man with creeping hunger and changed his clothes, he walked calmly through the streets. That woman seriously needs a job. Every time you visit her, she sleeps in her room or smokes her life away on the balcony. She's a disgrace. Flora snorted bitterly in his head, annoyance clear in her voice. Adjusting the scarf to cover his smiling lips, Adrian laughed softly. She's like that, I doubt a few short words will change that. Though I must say, she's trying her best to improve. You call a job in the circus her best to improve? Ha, at least she's useful for making the kids laugh. Flora clicked her tongue, laughing in derision. She has good tricks, Adrian said, his grin even bigger. Flora noticed this and quickly voiced her suspicion. Why are you smiling? She could feel it, it was about her. No reason, Adrian chanted. Her suspicion grew even more. Princess, Flora warned. If he was thinking she was jealous. You're afraid. The Jacob didn't respond immediately. She was silent for 6 seconds. Finally, she said in a calm voice, why do you say that? Adrian replied flatly, did you think I wouldn't notice? You have been frustrated very easily and more silent than usual. There is something that scares you. Flora said nothing. Walking calmly through the unsuspecting civilians, the black-haired man said nothing. His feet carried him leisurely through the streets of Ashera. After half an hour and after crossing an alley, a black liquid came out of his shadows and quickly wrapped itself around his arm. With a thought, his body sank into the same shadows. With 2 jumps, he was already in the bedroom of his flat. Sitting on the edge of his bed, Adrian stared at the wall in silence. After long minutes, his voice broke the silence in his bedroom. It's for the tower, isn't it? A tired sigh sounded deep in his head, so exhausted that for a moment, he didn't think it came from her. That's right. Flora paused momentarily before adding, remember what I said the last time we talked about it? He nodded, the suppression of the sequences. Adrian laughed a little, unamused, I was wondering when you'd bring that up in our talks. I got tired of waiting, so I took the first piece. At her silence, the idea that was whispering and tormenting his mind was confirmed. Sigh, you don't know what will happen to you, do you? According to Flora's words and what little he knew of the tower, it made the forms more even. If a meander of a higher sequence than the one on the floor entered, it would be suppressed to match the one on the floor. The first floor of the tower was equal to sequence 7, and you could only use abilities at that level and below. Flora was the parasite of sequence 4. Parasitism was a sequence 4 ability and the only thing keeping her alive. And how would I know? Flora growled in frustration. Have you forgotten already? You said so yourself. The Jacob and Zoroast family, while we've managed to survive so far and even give birth to demigods, were still incredibly weak. Counting me, there are only 3 demigods in the 2 families. While we have done some tests, we never tried to test what would happen if one of us entered the tower through a host. We are too valuable. Adrian kept quiet the entire time his companion spoke, listening attentively and calmly. When she finished, he gave a serious nod. I understand your concern, Flora. But pfff. His expression broke a little, the corners of his lips quivering with such force that it looked like he was suffering from a sprain on his face. Ads by PubFuture. Princess. Flora hissed through her teeth. Smoke billowed from her non-existent mouth. Adrian raised a hand and covered his face. Sorry, it's just that, pfff. His body began to tremble, he barely restrained himself. Pfff. Spittle escaped his super tight lips, tears peeking out of the corners of his eyes. Seriously, ha 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 ha, ha 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 ha, cough, sorry, but it's just that ha ha ha. Her words were cut off by the maniacal laughter from the black-haired man trying to explain himself but couldn't utter 3 words before laughing again. Knowing he couldn't do this, the red-haired man only went on for about 4 more seconds before recovering. Wiping away a tear with a final chuckle, he happily tossed it away. Phew, wow, Flora, you're worrying about unnecessary things, he said with one eye closed, swinging his legs like he was on a swing. There was no response from his companion. Oh, come on, Adrian snorted a little, dropping his back on the bed, he smiled calmly. Do you think I'd go into the tower without knowing if you'd be alright? He asked. Come on, Flora, do you think so low of me? When have I ever done anything that would put you at risk? Do you really want me to answer that question? The Jacob answered simply. Adrian could easily see a worm raising an eyebrow. Touché. Quote. At the return of the silence, the black-haired man rolled his eyes and got up from the bed. With a mischievous grin, he winked and leaned his head to the side. Do you forget that you are still under contract to my lord and therefore under his protection? You still have several decades to serve. You won't die so easily, my dear. Wouldn't it be easier to kill me and free you from me? There will be no better opportunity than this. Once we enter the tower, I will only be a sequence 7 no matter what happens. If you wanted to kill me, there would be nothing I could do about it. Flora admitted with honesty and clearly hurt pride. While they would both be sequence 7 and thus, equals, she wasn't stupid. What could a cryptologist do with almost no combat skills against a pyromaniac? A grimace formed on Adrian's face, his cheek burning and his mouth bitter. He felt as if he had eaten an incredibly bittersweet at the same time he was being slapped. Did Flora think so poorly of him? Did she really think he would abandon her after all she had done for him? Adrian found himself somewhat hurt by this, finding it a little hard to believe that it was all like this. Thinking deeper to find a reason, his eyes lit up. Remembering the words spoken by Flora the first time they met, he could only sigh internally, all making sense at that moment. Anyone who could say that about their family obviously didn't have a good relationship with them and vice versa. Flora grew up with the teaching that everyone was planning to use her. He made a mistake in thinking the Jacob family was similar to the Abraham and Zoroast families. The biggest clue should have been when he told her the story of why she was called Dancing Worm. What child watching their cousin suffocate would stand by and mock them instead of helping? No doubt it is a family of thieves. The Abraham family honorably represents the door pathway, always holding the door open for the family. The Jacob family represents the error pathway very well, stealing and taking without giving back, never minding that they betray their family in the process. That is why Flora thinks he will abandon her as soon as the opportunity presents itself. In her eyes, she thinks she's just a burden, a disease he can't wait to cure. A sad sigh leaves his lips, his eyes softening. I won't abandon you, Flora. I won't. An ironic snort rang in his ears. And how can I trust you? I doubt you've forgotten, but I tried to kill you. That's why I'm trapped here in your body. Ads by PubFuture. Don't you think this is the best course for you? With some coordination with your team, you'll have a sequence 4 characteristic. You can make a grade 1 artifact or use it to promote the brat. I honestly don't care. I don't kill my friends. Adrian cut her off, his words heavy and honest. A small whimper reached his ears, so small that he almost lost it amidst the following screams. Friends? Are you an idiot, Adrian? I try to kill you. Flora roared, running out of air if possible. And that's why you got trapped in my body. Repeating the woman's words back to her face with a smile, Adrian closed his eyes in pleasure. You're already paying for that crime, no ailments. You are unbearable, the Jacob semi-goddess gasped, a clear hiccup in her voice. A chuckle escaped his chest as his smile softened a little more. And your friend? Adrian opened a mischievous eye, raising a finger pointing towards nothingness. Don't forget. URGHH. A frustrated cry echoed in his head. In his mind, he could see the worm writhing on itself as if it had been salted. I love you too. Closing his eyes, Adrian kicked off his shoes and lay better on his bed. I'll leave you to your thoughts now. I just want to take a beauty nap. Wake me up if anything happens. It was more to joke than to take it seriously. As soon as he had entered her room, he had already used hangover time to seal the sound so no one knew he was there. The same in W.E. It wasn't that he'd taken a day off, it was just that his soldier was filling in for him and dealing with the annoying stuff, with orders to inform him of anything interesting that might happen. Letting out a satisfied groan, he covered himself well with the blanket and, with the help of the cogitation, quickly fell asleep, with only Flora's grunts and murmurs as white noise. Watching her charger sleep, Flora didn't know what to say. Friend, mumbling in her mind, a tired sigh left her lips. Closing her eyes, she, too, joined the dream world with the black-haired man. Helicon District, Great Library of Lindbergh. With huge bookshelves that were easily taller than normal houses, filled with books of various sizes, and neatly arranged, this 1,000-year-old library was the oldest and most important in the world. 2 people were sitting at one of the many tables in this exclusive library, in an even more exclusive room on the third floor, reading one book with a large stack of others at their sides. The older man with the long, wrinkled face, Zelig Ritter, looked at the person sitting across from him calmly. His eyes behind silver-rimmed circular glasses glowed softly in the lamplight. "I'm surprised you were the one chosen to introduce Mr. K to the tower." Zelig mused as he turned the next page of his book. The person before him was a short-haired, tan-skinned man of Biam ancestry. His brown eyes stared boredly at the book pages in his hands, which were written in Intis. "Mr. Thaddeus wants everything to go well. No accident will be spared," the man replied, his voice surprisingly soft yet deep. "If it is you, there is nothing to worry about," Zelig said as he closed the book. "Is it just an introduction, or will you accompany them on the floor, Mr. Euron?" "I will be a guide. As I said, no accident will be forgiven." Upon repeated, his tone was a little graver than before. The older Zelig nodded calmly, all interest in the subject being abandoned. "How is our communication with the Royal Museum? The transfer is to take place in October, is it not?" "That's right," the tan-skinned man replied. "Recent events in Backland have brought unexpected benefits. The previous talks that never came to anything finally found common ground." Zelig nodded again, calmly, his eyes moved from the man before him to the book in his hands. "You think she'll come?" The flame of the lamp trembled for a moment before returning to normal. For the first time since he sat down, Euron looked up from the book he was reading to the older man in front of him. "It's her father's memorial exhibition. I wouldn't be surprised. Should we increase security? She is a Sea King, after all?" Zelig questioned with a slightly raised eyebrow. Euron shook his head, his gaze returned to the book in his hands. "Mr. Thaddeus says it's not necessary. Her guarding the museum greatly diminishes the odds of anyone trying to do anything. And if a fool were to try, I'm sure it wouldn't be 3 seconds before the wrath of the sea would fall upon them." Thursday the 30th of August 1349. Mission Day. Adjusting the straps tighter over his white shirt, accentuating his figure a little more, Adrian grabbed his black leather jacket and slipped it on. Checking the hidden pockets of the same and the charms and multiple paper figurines in them, he gave a soft nod. 2 black gloves covered his hands, one of which was creeping hunger in faceless mode. Stashing Vecchio Pomodoro and Talk Millennium in one of the free pockets, the man nodded in satisfaction. Like last time, he was not in his usual Harvey Wayne disguise but that of a man with no significant detail to highlight apart from a mole under his left eye. "Ready, Flora?" the black-haired man questioned the air. "Let's just get this over with." The young man could only sigh and shake his head slightly at the demigoddess' cold reply. While looking relaxed and calm, he was a bit nervous. He was confident that Hunter's Hallow knew that he wanted it to protect Flora when they entered the tower. But he couldn't help but fear for her safety. "You saved me from the divine whore and the flesh wrecker. I'm sure you can protect her from this." All was done, and with that, the shadows enveloped Adrian, and he disappeared from the room he had rented in a minor hotel. Half an hour later, Helicon District. Taking a step out of the shadows, Adrian found himself inside a dark wardrobe. Of course, rolling his eyes, Adrian grabbed the handle and pulled it open. "Excuse me, it's good to see you, Mr. Adrian," one of the 2 occupants of the room answered. He was a man with malicious eyes, pale skin, and a brown waistcoat. Sitting in the chair of the room was a beautiful blonde woman, pale-skinned and wearing a Gothic dress with a large hat. Her cold, expressionless blue eyes were closed, and she appeared to be taking a nap. Zombie Marich and Wraith Sharon. They stood in a small private reading room at a bookstore where they were supposed to meet. Smiling at the duo, he gave a soft nod as he removed the burnt band from his forearm. "Good afternoon, Mr. Zombie. Miss Casper, how has Ashera been treating you?" Marich looked at him for a few seconds before answering, "Not much to say. We're just following what you told us, we haven't interacted much with the population. I simply said to be careful when going out, not to be antisocial and lock yourselves in your rooms," Adrian replied with a flat face. An eyebrow on the zombie's face twitched. Other than that, nothing more happened. Huffing a little, the black-haired man gave them a serious look. "I'm using some of my contacts to find an artifact to deal with the full moon's effects. I'm assuming the one who will be using it the most will be Miss Sharon, right? Since Sequence 8 lunatic, the Beander of the chained pathway would suffer from different curses. Each time they advanced, a new one would replace the previous one. Zombies' curse was that they will begin to increasingly thirst for the warm blood and fresh meat of human beings. This state will be severe during the full moon, causing them pain. While Wraith's curse would be on the night of a full moon, they either need to consume a certain number of human souls or become extremely weak. Choosing the former is equivalent to being on the brink of losing control at any moment. Certain artifacts of the moon pathway, specifically those made of the lunar scholar, could suppress these curses, allowing them to maintain their rationality and strength. Marich was taken a little by surprise, his eyes widening and his eyebrows rising slightly. The zombie looked to his side toward his companion, who at some point opened her eyes and looked at the black-haired man in front of them. Is that true? As far as I know, I have never told you a lie, miss. Looking at the man, Sharon closed her eyes and gave a soft nod. I thank you. With the artifact, the nights will be much easier. You are under my wing now. I have my pups to look after. Adrian smiled slightly, approaching them. Marich looked sideways at him, his gaze not as malicious and much more controlled. There was a hint of curiosity in it. You are more familiar with our pathway than I thought. I have a good information center. The red-haired man replied with a smile. Before we go, you are not familiar with the tower, are you? We've heard of it, but we've never been inside, Marich replied. Only certain members were chosen to enter, and several of them never returned, and many of those who did failed to complete the floor. Sharon added without opening her eyes. The black-haired man listened intently, his brow slightly furrowed. So, are you guys ready to go in? Sharon gave a soft nod as her eyes opened. We are, Mr. Adrian. He looked at them for a while, then nodded slightly. If anything happens, just stay close to me. With everything in order, the now trio left the room on their way to the rendezvous point. A while later, in the middle of a park, with giant trees and a few clearings with ponds and paths and seats, was the Temple of Knowledge. From the outside view, one would think that one of the many Greek temples went through a hole in space-time, crossed centuries and millennia, and landed here. But strangely enough, as strange as it looked, it was not an eyesore. It blended in nicely with the colorful roofs of the numerous buildings surrounding its edges. The trio was moving along a hidden path through the forest. The path was hidden by means of rituals and diversions. Only if you knew of its existence could you pass through, and even then, you would have to know how to move along it. If not, you would end up in one of the clearings in the park. Ads by PubFuture. They only knew how to move because the older woman who brought the documents with their new identities had shown them the way. Not even a hunter could find this path. I doubt I would have if I didn't know it was here. Adrian admitted to himself. He would have been lost long ago without knowing which way to go. Unable to help himself, a chuckle came from him. I could say that about my whole life here. Without Klein, I would have been dead long ago. Most certainly, he wasn't as my guiding light. His sudden laughter caught the attention of the duo walking silently behind him. Marich looked at him with a slightly raised eyebrow while Sharon tilted her head to the side slightly. Sounds a bit like a fox. The wraith couldn't help but make a mental comparison. Her head tilted a bit more. Thus, and without much witticism, the trio followed the path until they finally reached the discreet entrance to the Temple of Knowledge, which was a door hidden in a tree. Beside it stood a biome-ascent man with deep brown eyes accentuated by slight dark circles under his eyes and short black hair. He held in his right hand an open pocket watch. His gaze focused solely on it. You are 10 minutes early. Good work, Mr. K. With a click, he closed the watch and put it away. Adrian smiled. It's a church mission. The least I can do is to be on time. I assume you are Mr. Euron Maltier. That's right. Euron nodded calmly. He then looked at the people behind him. Are they all you're taking? Is anyone else joining us? The red-haired man was about to answer, yes, but stopped himself. After some consideration, he shook his head. We may be joined by someone else once we're in the tower. A black eyebrow rose. And why would that be? Why are they not with us right now? I'm afraid you are mistaken, Mr. Euron. She's already with us right now, she's just unsure whether to join us. The man narrowed his eyes slightly, and they gained a certain silvery glow. Adrian could feel as if such a gaze was reading him. Those glowing eyes moved from Sharon and Marich to the forest around them. After a while, the man's frown softened a little, and the silver glow disappeared. If that was a joke, I must say your humor is awful. There's no one else here but us. You might want to check your eyes, you idiot. I'm here, A familiar mocking shout rang in his ears, and the conspirator couldn't help but laugh a little. Deciding to play along, he nodded his head and winked at Euron. Fufu, what do you want me to say? I know how to break the ice. If the man wanted to take it as a joke, so be it. Whatever happened, he had already been warned. He just refused to listen. That's the members of the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom for you. A bunch of tight asses who refuse to listen to any truth other than what they believe is right. As if reading his mind, Flora added between derisive chuckles, drawing another chuckle from her charger. This seemed to further strengthen Euron's resolve. He rolled his eyes in boredom and walked over to them. If you're done laughing at your lousy joke, Mr. K, we have places to go, and the clock is ticking. Giving an exaggerated bow, Adrian extended his arm behind him, inviting Euron to come forward. Please show us the way, sir. Flat-faced, Euron accepted the invitation and took the lead, with Adrian, Sharon, and Marich following behind him, the latter giving a glance at their leader's back. This time, Euron took a different path from the one the trio had come from and stayed around the Temple of Knowledge. After walking for a while, they left the park, forest and re-entered the city. Calmly, the duo moved through the crowded streets of Helicon without much inconvenience until not long after they left the district. After a long while, the curious group stood before a bar in the Artelia district. On a large brown sign, Joe's Bodega, was written. Are you sure this is it? Adrian asked, looking sideways at the man, who nodded nonchalantly. Without answering, the man entered, followed by the trio. The bar was not unlike what he was used to, with a long table in the back, several stools in front of it, and several circular tables on the floor, with people drinking quietly. It looked more like a place to drink with colleagues than with friends. Euron just walked on by without talking to the bartender or any of the waiters moving around the place. He went straight to the staircase, which was guarded by a tall man of sturdy build. Euron pulled a set of keys from his pocket, and the key ring was a small owl. The guard gave a simple nod and let them pass to the next floor. Locking the door to the room with the owl key ring, Euron turned to look at the group with a deep and serious gaze. I'm sure you briefed them, but I'll still repeat what we're about to do. We are about to enter the first floor of the tower. What it is will be better explained once inside. What you need to know is that your sequences will be suppressed to sequence 7, the same with your artifacts. So, if you have any higher than this, I recommend you put them away now. If you take it inside, it will be confiscated, and you can only get it back if you complete the floor. You can leave it here if you like. This room has been treated with various rituals. No one can enter or leave until the key reopens the door, freeing this space. Adrian looked at Euron with a raised eyebrow. Did this guy really think he'd trust his artifacts to some shoddy ritual? Grabbing his left glove, he pulled it off, revealing another black glove underneath. As creeping hunger left his hand, his face, hair, skin, stature, and musculature began to change. Within 8 seconds, his appearance had returned to that of Adrian Kenway. For creeping hunger's faceless ability to work, the glove had to be on him at all times. The moment it was removed he would return to his original appearance. Ads by PubFuture. Grabbing a strip he had prepared earlier, the red-haired man tied his hair into his usual high ponytail, leaving as always a few loose strands that framed his face. What? With a raised eyebrow, Adrian asked Euron, who was looking directly at him. It's nothing. The man shook his head, looking away from him. Rolling his eyes, Adrian pulled several red poppies, vials, candles, and the symbol of the Scarlet Monarch from his jacket. He quickly placed everything in its place before Euron's hard stare, who said nothing and made no attempt to stop him at any point. He just stood and watched, as did Sharon and Marich, who stood to the side closer to the red-haired man. With the red poppies, candles, and symbol in place, Adrian looked up at the duo. Do you have anything you need to keep? Sharon shook her head curtly. The youngest in the room nodded in response, placed creeping hunger on the altar. He knelt down, clasped his hands together in prayer and closed his eyes. The Scarlet Monarch who burns depravity. The calamity forgotten by time. The stranger that comes from the uncown. Your devoted servant prays for your attention. I pray for you to take this offering. I pray for you to open the gates to your kingdom. With the whispers reaching his ears, Adrian began to draw the sphere of light in his mind. After a few seconds, the candle fire that illuminated the altar rose, and a fiery gate formed. Praise the monarch. Opening his eyes, clearing the altar, and now with the glove in a safe place, Adrian turned to look at the duo. Ready? They both nodded. Turning to look at a serious Euron, no words were exchanged, the message clear in his smile. The dark-skinned man merely nodded and held out his right hand. In the palm of it, a tattoo formed. It was a circle interspersed with several rings, with various symbols and triangles all pointing in one direction. This black tattoo glowed purple. The next second, Euron opened his mouth, ancient Hermes reverberating off the room's walls. Open. The next instant, the tattoo pulsed, and the once fanned room was now empty. To his eyes, he had barely blinked, and the room with its soft cream walls and single bed was replaced by a strange black ceramic floor. Grasping his head, the redhead only grimaced slightly at the hammering in his brain. Is this what it feels like to become suddenly stupider? Blinking slightly, he looked up and looked around. Marich and Sharon were only a little further away from where they were before, both had their hands on their heads, surely going through the same thing he was. A few feet ahead was Euron, his eyes tightly closed and one hand on his head. Seeing Sharon and Euron's reaction, alarm bells immediately went off in Adrian's head. Flora still hadn't said anything yet. Taking advantage of the fact that the others were still in a daze, he was about to whisper to check her condition when suddenly everything spun around. Thud. Dropping to one knee, the red-haired man clutched his chest in pain, feeling as if multiple knives were stabbing at his heart and lungs. Huff. Breathing heavily, Adrian blinked several times in rapid succession, trying to clear the lights in his eyes. What was happening to his body? His eyes widened. Flora. As soon as he thought that name, a blinding white light formed in the air above him, drawing the attention of everyone present who had finally recovered from the effects of the suppression of their sequences. Adrian didn't look at the people around him or listen to what they were saying. His eyes were completely focused on the blinding light above him that was getting smaller and smaller, and a figure could be made out in it. Reacting quickly, the red-haired man leapt several meters into the air as the light suddenly vanished and a figure fell. Extending his arms, he caught it princess style and he fell gracefully to the ground, his scarlet eyes never leaving the beautiful face in his arms. She was a young woman, her long woolly white hair reminding him of clouds in the sky. Her eyelashes were delicate, and her features were very pleasing to the eye. She was wearing an elegant purple dress that only accentuated her beauty. The red-haired man looked dazedly at the woman in his arms. In an uncertain voice he asked, "Flora?" The woman's eyelids twitched slightly. With some annoyance they fluttered open, revealing beautiful pearly gray eyes full of confusion. The woman mumbled, her voice identical to the one Adrian hears in his mind, only this time coming from the woman in his arms. The woman Adrian assumed to be Flora blinked, clearly still a little lost. Unable to help himself, the red-haired man chuckled a little, smiling at the woman. "Why, Miss Worm, I must say that even though you are an old woman, you really are beautiful." The woman's somewhat lost eyes immediately sharpened in righteous fury. The woman's hands grabbed the man's shirt and pulled him closer to her until their noses were almost touching. "Call me old again, princess, and I swear," her blazing fire died as she suddenly ran out of gas, drying up at the sight of the big grin on his face above her. On top of her, not how she usually saw him as a spirit, but on top of her. A strange sensation in her fingertips caused her to look down. She saw the shirt crumpled between her fingers. Squeezing a little tighter at the cottony sensation, she looked at her hands in astonishment. They were not the ugly pink 4-digit ones she had become accustomed to seeing, but her delicate 5-digit human hands. She got her body back. "It's impossible. My condition was only slightly better than before. Recovering my body would have taken decades at that rate." Feeling her own body in a long time, her eyes widened in shock. "What is this?" she mumbled, but her voice was interrupted by the sudden voice of her charger, who had brought his face close to her ear. "Sorry to disturb your rejuvenation time, but we have an audience in case you've forgotten. Can you walk?" Looking at the stares he was getting, Adrian could only sigh a little. Was his body so comfortable that Flora forgot where they were now? It took a few seconds for her to respond, but the white-haired woman slightly nodded. Her look had recovered, but she still had a hint of disbelief. With that permission, Adrian lowered her to her feet but didn't let go. Instead, he grabbed her hand and waited for her to find her balance. The white-haired woman snorted slightly but allowed herself to be helped. Once she found her footing, she let go of the man's hand, giving him a side eye, and then looked at the rest of those present with suspicion. Considering her next move, she was somewhat surprised when the red-haired man stepped in front of her, covering her with his larger body. "Remember how I said it was likely that someone else would join us?" Adrian asked with slightly raised lips. "I was referring to her." "I don't need you to babysit me, princess." The white-haired woman huffed, her brow furrowed into a grimace of annoyance. Adrian's lips twitched slightly. "Miss Worm, this is not the time to play hard to get." He gave her a flat look, already somewhat expecting that reaction but still finding it ridiculous. Someone unknown appearing in front of a group of experienced beyonders the way she had. She would have been attacked instantly. The only reason that didn't happen was because the rest were busy recovering from the sequence suppression to do something, and he had been quicker to catch up with her. Sharon and Marich looked at each other, somewhat dazed and confused. They didn't understand where she had come from or how she had gotten here, but seeing the familiarity with which their boss interacted with her, they didn't comment much, they just watched. Euron was the most stunned, his eyebrows raised in surprise and bewilderment. His gaze focused on the new guest who had appeared almost out of nowhere. From Reader of Sequence 9, Beyonders on this path gain the Eye of the Reader, an ability that facilitates the gathering and analysis of information they can observe. As the sequences progress, this ability strengthens, allowing them to analyze Beyonders' abilities and find their weaknesses. There were also several additional ways to use it, such as watching an area for any abnormalities. This helped in performing rituals, spells, and magic to find mistakes and avoid accidents. Being the mysticism magister of Sequence 5, he had failed to detect someone even when using the Eye of the Reader. As an experienced wise owl, Euron regained control and took a more serious look at the larger group before him. Internally, he decided to take what Adrian Kenway said more seriously. I have to ignore the tone he's speaking in. It may sound like he's telling a joke worse than Jonah's, but he's revealing true information. What a curious method of deception, using humor and tone to make the person you're talking to think you're just talking rubbish when you're telling truths. Brilliant. Squinting slightly, Euron questioned, Mr. Adrian, could you introduce us to your friend? She had to be unique to have passed through all the temple's security means without being discovered. A secret sorcerer perhaps. No, even for them, bypassing all the security measures would be impossible. As his advanced but suppressed mind tried to give the woman an identity, Adrian looked at the white-haired woman beside him and smiled. Ads by PubFuture. Knowing that smile better than anyone, she was about to stop him by silencing his mouth, her hands already in motion, but as always, his lips were quicker than hers. This is Abigail, my wife, the redhead said, smiling. We're not married. Flushed with fury and indignation, Flora could only do the next best thing she could think of, clench her fist, which connected with the man's side. Pooh, not here, my dear. There are people present. Adrian groaned a little at the blow, highly amused at what was happening though highly surprised. While it seemed like the blow would have more force when it touched him, it merely felt as if Flora had caressed him with her fist. Non-violence rule. Adrian wondered internally as he tore his gaze away from Flora and focused on the rest. The goth duo looked rather lost and confused while Euron looked away uncomfortably. Of course, the nerd would be uncomfortable. The redhead rolled his eyes a little internally. Snorting a little, the woman moved to Adrian's right side, an annoyed expression on his face. Ignore what the princess says. He looks smart, but he's a severely mentally retarded monkey. I am Flora, his companion. She fixed her hair a little, tucking it behind her ear. And may I ask why we were not informed of the existence of this companion, Mr. Kenway? Euron asked calmly while looking at him. Because it wasn't necessary, Adrian replied, a bored expression on his face. Excuse me. Euron narrowed his eyes, his tone a little more serious. Adrian did not care how the man, who was, in a way, his superior, was looking at him. He closed his eyes in disinterest as he rolled his shoulders. Mr. Euron, I'll keep it simple for you to understand. The situation with Flora is rather peculiar. You need not worry about her causing trouble. I'm afraid that's not the case, Mr. Kenway. The church must be aware of every member you brought into the country. You are not in a place to do as you please without informing the church first. The situation with Flora is a matter for the Scarlet Monarch. Adrian cut in a soft voice without opening his eyes. The wise owl's mouth immediately snapped shut, his eyes wide open. Then, The red-haired man opened his eyes, which glowed cold as a blade. If that is not enough to know that you should not inquire further, then you are not a wise owl but a foolish pigeon. The expression broke a little, but with his experience, the man recovered and nodded solemnly. I understand. The sentence that every Beander knew echoed loudly in the minds of all present. Unconsciously, Flora clenched her fist slightly, still remembering clearly the first time she had seen him. Considering that the situation had been resolved, Adrian took a better look around with a raised eyebrow. They were now in a room with black ceramic floors. It had no walls or ceiling, instead, a thick gray fog enclosed them in a capsule. I doubt this is the tower, Adrian asked, returning his attention to Euron, who nodded. This isn't the tower, we're in the antechamber right now. Wanting to put the subject behind him, Euron wasted no time explaining. How familiar are you all with the tower? Just the basics. A structure somewhere in the spirit or astral world that is divided into floors and whose entrance appears at timed intervals, and you can only find it if someone who already has the compass takes you there or if you're unlucky. How do the rewards and floor levels work? Adrian replied, extremely curious about what the Church of Wisdom might know. Euron nodded, his face returning to its usual expressionless expression. Then you already know almost everything we know about it regarding what it is. Adrian was surprised at this. Wait, the Church doesn't know what it is either. No one knows what the tower is, Mr. Kenway. Euron shook his head, disappointment was evident on his face. Adds by PubFuture. If we were to put someone from the fourth epoch with everything they knew about the tower with someone from the present with the same characteristics in the same room and set them to argue about the information each has, the difference would only be a few short sentences. Then the man snorted ungraciously and added, we don't even know if it has an ending. A little emotional there, mate. Adrian looked flatly at the man who, realizing his mistake, coughed a little. If you have any questions, wait until I'm done to express them, or if you like, raise your hand. Seeing that no one said more, the man nodded and began. The entrance to the tower opens every so often, and once it opens, you can only climb one floor at a time. The time between openings is variable, it can be a few weeks or even months. It used to be years, but it hasn't been for a while now. The place is also always different from the previous one. The only sure way to find the entrances is through compasses provided by the tower. Euron then held up his hand, showing the tattoo that still glowed faintly purple. This is the compass. By means yet unknown to us, it will always point to the next entrance along with the exact time, place, and moment it will open. Attempts have been made to replicate it, but all attempts have failed. A pale hand was raised. What is your query, miss? Is the tattoo necessary? Is there no other way? Sharon asked. The compass has to be attached to the skin, to the body. It functions not only as a guide but also as protection from the journey. We tried to enter the tower using the compass and using crumbs to follow its path, but the seeker never returned. It's not permanent. You can remove it if you wish, it's just a matter of saying so. Besides, it only takes one of you to have it to make the journey safe, the rest can refuse it. Sharon nodded softly at the answer, satisfied. Is there something in the Temperance faction that makes tattoos frowned upon? What are they, Catholic? Adrian looked curiously at the little ghost, and after a moment's consideration, he gave a slight nod. If the Rose School is different from the original story, then there is no one better to ask than the members of the Temperance faction, who have been in an internal war with the Indulgence faction. His company was already making a small profit and the mess left by the previous owner was mostly sorted out along with the furs problem. Adrian could now finally afford to have a deeper talk with the Gothic duo. Seeing that there were no more questions, Euron continued with his explanation. Next are the zones. First is the area where we are, the anteroom. As you may have noticed, violence is forbidden here. We can't hurt each other or attack each other. We advance a little further and will be in front of the tower. There is nothing to mention there, only that if you try to go beyond the marked path, you will come out in some random part of the world, so stay on the path. Once inside the tower, there will be a meeting point where more people will start climbing the tower. The non-violence rule also applies there. As long as you are not on the floors, you cannot attack or harm another. There, you will get the compass I mentioned earlier. Euron paused momentarily, and seeing that no one said anything, he just continued. Finally, there are the floors themselves. While we don't know how many there are, we know the types. First of all floors are different, you will never face the same challenge that you have already faced in a previous one. There are so many types of challenges that it would be impossible to count them all. Sometimes it defeats a monster, sometimes it acts like a mental freak. The variety is so great that explaining it is a waste of time. Finally, there is the escape system. If required, one can leave the floor they are on whenever they want, but if they use that escape, they will be forced to complete that floor to advance. Is this the case of Professor Syndrome? Edwina also had the same problem, giving lectures and exams to her crew. Unable to avoid making the comparison, Adrian just stood quietly and listened to the rich explanation. His eyes moved momentarily to Sharon and Marich, who were also listening attentively, and then to Flora, who was looking on in boredom. He was confused as to why she decided to say her name when he gave her the opportunity to use a fake one. No one would have known, but she still revealed her name. Maybe it was pride. Also, how come she now had a body? He was sure that Hunter Hallow had something to do with it, but he also felt that the tower had done something since the sequence of Flora was suppressed. He also couldn't shake that strange feeling he had all over his body, as if something was missing. I doubt it's because I no longer have my beloved parasite inside me. But if it's not her, then what is it? While confused, he didn't feel it was an urgent problem, so it could wait a bit. Putting that aside, Euron had finally finished his explanation. Without further hesitation, the brown man held out his hand with the purple tattoo, and the mist surrounding them extinguished like a mirage. With the fog gone, what immediately caught Adrian's attention was the structure in sight that stunned him. A shadowy tower loomed in the distance, following a path of the same black ceramics and surrounded by gray mist. The path was nothing special as far as Adrian could see. It was just a simple black ceramic floor. Although he didn't rule out that it had something hidden in it, the path was neither too thick nor too narrow, just wide enough for the group of 4 to move comfortably. On the sides of the path, there was only a thick, dense fog that covered everything and made it impossible to see anything, the sight of which hinted that if you went in there, you would get lost and end up in a place you didn't want to be. This is not the spirit world. Adrian frowned slightly, swallowing a little saliva at his suddenly dry throat. The fog that stretched into what seemed like infinity didn't feel like the spirit world, and the way everything felt was wrong. It was an uncomfortable and strange sensation that even now Adrian found difficult to explain in words, but if he put one to it, it would be a misguided reverse. But the sensation only exalted what loomed at the bottom of this strange world, the endless tower, which grew exponentially larger with each step the group took. The curious group moved along the strange path, following Euron's instructions. They did not try to leave it and kept close to each other. Common sense and logic didn't work or serve here. In just a few minutes of walking, the tower that once looked like a common skyscraper in the distance now looked like an impassable guard, a tower that one would expect to have thousands of bloody warriors ready to defend it until their last breath. But no one was there. It was empty, leaving a sense of failure and absence. The entrance itself was a huge fort door made of old and badly damaged wood. Beyond it was a dark black corridor that didn't seem to lead anywhere. This is the point where a monster usually comes out of there and tries to kill us. Who could it be, a xenomorph or Jason? Adrian joked inwardly as he looked at the curious darkness that invited to be visited. This is as far as I go with you. Euron's sudden voice caught the group's attention. Won't you accompany us inside? I thought you were our guide. Flora questioned with a raised eyebrow. I was until we got here. On their first times here, it's normal for people to wander off the path and end up in a different place than the one they came in. Euron then looked at Adrian. I don't need to mention why the church can't afford that, do I, Mr. Kenway? Adrian waved his hand in disinterest. Yeah. The church doesn't want to lose its investment without seeing the returns. Seeing that his message had been understood, Euron's lips lifted almost imperceptibly. Once you cross the hallway, you will enter the main hall and get the compass to find the next entrance in its opening day. Also, each time you enter a door, the people you bring with you will be a group, entering the same floor, so don't worry if you get separated. You will undoubtedly meet again on the floor. When I leave, the leader of the group will be you, Mr. Kenway. I will be seeing you. With that said, Euron gave a slight bow with his hand on his chest, straightened up, and turned around. With a step and a subtle purple glow, the wise owl disappeared from the doorway. The red-haired man looked at the place where the man had been, an idea formed in his mind and he slowly extended his arm. Thud, of course. Laughing a little, he extended his palm to the object he had touched and put a little force into it, but nothing changed. His arm failed to fully extend before it collided with what appeared to be an invisible wall. If there had been no insurance to keep us here, I doubt he would have left us, Flora said, looking sideways at him. Yeah, I know. Sighing, Adrian pulled his hand away from the wall and turned to look at the group behind him. Sharon and Marich stood off to the side, looking at him, while Flora stood a little more to the side, her gaze exasperated and somewhat weary. Ignoring the eagerness to advance Flora, the red-haired man looked cautiously at the Gothic duo. How are you guys holding up? Any wishes you have? Marich scoffed in offense at his question, his eyes shining a little like spotlights in the unnatural light of the place. I've been through Werewolf's Curse once before, compared to zombies, this is nothing. Sharon nodded in agreement to his words. Her ethereal and somewhat cold aura had greatly reduced, and her eyes had gained some sparkle and did not look as cold as before. It's not a problem. Looking at them, Adrian gave a slight nod. Then, in a serene voice he said, once we are inside I will take the compass, there is no need for you to be marked as well. Dressed in her black dress that looked like a classic Gothic, Sharon pursed her slightly redder lips and gave a slight nod. We appreciate it. Marich, again acting as his companion's voice, gave a nod in respect. His tone slightly raspier but calmer. If you're done, can we come in? Flora cut in, her annoyance clear in her tone. We can't stay here all day. Sighing again at his companion, Adrian smiled at the duo as he raised the hood of his jacket, hiding his hair. Shall we? Ads by PubFuture. Lead the way, Mr. Adrian. Marich nodded with a somewhat canine smile while Sharon merely nodded softly. Laughing a little, Adrian began to walk. Unable to help himself, he lifted his head slightly and began to march gracefully. Pointing a finger to the front, he exclaimed as Sergeant, follow me, my pups. Towards the snack shop. Just as they started to follow him, the now werewolf Marich and Sharon froze for a second in their tracks. Damn it, princess. Holding back the smile that threatened to break her face, Flora quickly followed the redhead. Her shoulders shaking slightly from the restrained laughter. The walk down the dark corridor was silent, not much of an event. It was just a dense darkness, and despite the blackness, everyone could see each other clearly. It's as if this is the background of an art. The centerpiece has all the colors while the background is devoid. Unable to avoid making the comparison, Adrian raised his hand and looked at the separation of the void with his black glove. For a few moments, they continued to walk in this void until, in the distance, a tiny dot of light appeared. I recommend you close your eyes. Flora's late warning was all they had received before, and in an instant, the light became all they could see. Blinking to get the lights out of his sight, Adrian could only grunt slightly as he looked at a deadpan Flora. Thanks to his keen senses, he noticed the slightly raised corners of her lips and the contentment in her eyes. Rolling his eyes, Adrian decided he would punish her later. Out of curiosity, he turned behind them and the corridor they had entered had disappeared. There was only a cold gray rock wall. No turning back, Sighing internally, the red-haired man returned to the front, unable to help but be surprised at what he saw. A colossal hall where a football stadium could easily fit and still leave room for 2 other stadiums. Huge gray pillars surrounded the super hall. They had numerous cracks covering their bodies, but they still stood strong and unbreakable. There was no ceiling, just a void of impenetrable darkness that seemed to be acting as a ceiling. Every now and then, something seemed to move in it. The red-haired man immediately looked away as soon as he felt his head ache. Don't look at the ceiling, focus your gaze below, Flora mentioned next to him. Parping a little to regain concentration, Adrian looked down at what seemed to be the center of the place, reverberating with activity. Hundreds of people were moving in groups of at least 2, he could barely see a single one. The activity was such that Adrian couldn't help but think he had walked into a quinceañera. Still, compared to these Latino parties, the redhead noticed the lack of cubicles selling alcohol. So, with a raised eyebrow, he turned to the purple-clad white-haired woman. With so many Beyonders here, one would expect the odd strolling merchant. It's a waste of time. Flora said dully, once the gates open, you can never come back here again. This point only exists for newcomers. The doors open. Marich frowned slightly, looking around. In all this huge space that could easily fit several small villages, there was nothing besides pillars and people. There was no grand staircase to the next floor or a huge door. You will understand in a few moments. It's been almost 10 minutes since the door opened. There are only 20 seconds to go, Flora replied uninterestedly, looking at her nails. At her words, Adrian could only whistle in surprise as he continued to look around. Time to rest before we're transported to the floor. Not bad. Passing his gaze over the various groups of people who were also here for the first time, whether they came accompanied or alone, the red-haired man wondered what kind of challenge they would face this time. Euron had told them that the challenges on each floor were different, and so varied that it would be impossible to describe them all. Perhaps he would face a golem, or maybe it would be to solve some mystery. If they faced a monster, they would quickly subdue it with his firepower and the help of 2 werewolves, not to mention the artifacts he brought with him. And if it were the second where they had to solve a puzzle or mystery, it would be even better. After all, they do have a cryptologist with them. Though, of course, if it were that simple, the Emperor of the Perverts would never have complained about the difficulty, and Flora wouldn't have been so vehement about me not coming here. There had to be something else to these floors that he wasn't catching. His scarlet eyes flicked past what he was seeing and focused on a spot not far from them. A previously empty place was now occupied by 2 people, surely just arriving. One of them was holding the other by the back of the neck like a naughty cat. The naughty cat had dark blonde hair, and his almost black blue eyes glared hatefully at the man holding him, but he ignored him, his red gaze clashing with his scarlet one. The man with the red eyes was quite handsome but looked quite pale, which was counterbalanced by his long red hair, giving him the appearance of a ghoul. He wore black armor stained with blood. The black-armored man looked confused, and Adrian was sure that he was not unlike a deer caught in a car's headlights. Batum 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 batum, ads by PubFuture. His heart began to race, pumping blood to every part of his body, adrenaline accompanying it. Pupils shrinking. Time seemed to stand still for the 2 of them. Suddenly, a gigantic flash of light formed above everyone's head, bringing dead silence and snapping the redheads out of their trance, who looked up at it for a moment. A giant sphere of light had condensed, quickly transforming into a giant number 3. Seeing what was about to happen, Adrian refused to leave it at that. Turning to look at the armored man from before, a huge grin formed on his face as he pulled down his hood, his fire-red hair descending. EY, 3-flavored soup. A mighty shout echoed through the silent place, drawing everyone's attention to the source, who was a young red-haired man. Hey, is that not Adrian Kenway? What's that madman doing here? Get him. Some people heeded the order and charged towards them. The number of lights changed to a 2. Damn it, princess, Flora cursed as she reflexively backed away. Was that necessary? Sharon asked, glaring at him. There was a hint of annoyance in her eyes. You're insane. Marich growled wolfishly and hunched over. Grinning from ear to ear with his white teeth showing, Adrian ignored his team and raised his middle finger to the black armor-clad figure, who looked speechless. Fuck you. The number of light changed 1 as the expression on the figure's face broke into a grimace and 2 bloody mouths formed on his cheeks. From a distance Adrian could almost tell they were laughing. The next instant, a vast flash blinded everyone, and the gigantic hall returned to silence. Groaning slightly, Adrian brought a gloved hand to his head as he rose from the damp floor where he was lying. You bear the mark, you are cursed. You must place your hand upon the stone. A mysterious, ethereal voice came from everywhere. Adrian froze as he heard the mysterious but oh so familiar voice. Incredulously, the red-haired man opened his eyes as a soft melody began to play in his ears. Behind him, several grunts were heard, along with the sound of people waking up. I never get used to that, Flora growled grumpily as she got up from the ground and approached the redhead. Where are we? Marich asked as Sharon stood up behind him and looked around calmly, rocking her head slightly to the entrancing music. I've never heard a tune like that before. The wraith now werewolf murmured slightly. She looked around and noticed they were now in an alleyway in some city. Several broken windows were barely covered by wooden planks, and a strange blue machine was in a short corridor. At the far end of the alley, she could see a metal gate leading to a large open space. Reaching the man, Flora was about to say something when she saw her companion's face, which froze her. Adrian's eyes were wide open, his mouth hung open slightly, and his gaze was full of disbelief. Stunned, Flora looked around in alarm, searching for something that could put someone like her partner in that state, but found nothing. A crazy idea formed in her mind, and she quickly turned her attention back to the man. "Princess, do you know where we are?" Adrian nodded, regaining control as he looked at her, his expression quivering slightly. "Unfortunately, yes." Just as Sharon and Marich approached to see what was going on, loud, animalistic growls sounded. Yellow eyes appeared from the darkness of the broken windows. The trio stood on guard as Adrian watched what was happening with a complicated expression. He recognized this alley, or, as he used to call it, the initial room. Is this fucking Shadows of Evils? Adrian honestly didn't think he could be more surprised on this day, but it wasn't more than 5 seconds after he saw the evil spirit that his newborn expectation was slain. Not only did he meet his deadly foe as soon as he entered the tower, but he discovered that whoever created this tower was a transmigrator. No wonder they never said the tower was a fair system. If someone didn't know what to do here, they'd think they just had to keep killing zombies and going up the rounds. Shaking his head slightly, the red-haired man looked to the trio's side as the yellow eyes in the shadows slowly approached. Nodding thoughtfully, the redhead quickly began, "Listen up. We have a few moments before we're disturbed by those zombies, so I'll be quick. The goal of this floor is not to survive or kill all the monsters but to complete the ritual. Remember, complete, not survive. Just do as I say, and we won't be tomato-smoked puppies." "How are you so sure? I know that this is your first time in the tower," Flora said. "You can't possibly know what to do as soon as you walk in." "We need a little honesty to continue, Mr. Adrian," Sharon added, her gaze deep as a wolf. Marich stood near her, looking at him with intensity and some ill-contained malice. They were suspicious, and the redhead understood. Right now, he was being too shady, and if he didn't know how to de-escalate, it would only make things worse. And cooperation was what he needed most right now. After all, completing the ritual alone was impossible unless unconventional means were used, which, for obvious reasons, was impossible now. Thinking it over and considering the dangers, a story quickly formed in the mind of the pyromaniac. Placing a gloved hand over his heart, his expression softened slightly, and he explained believingly. "My lord often shows me things from where he comes from. One was a game, precisely like the one we're in. At first, I thought it was just survival, but thanks to my lord, I learned that there were hidden steps to complete a secret mission." Flora was stunned and looked at her companion in shock. The Scarlet Monarch's place of origin. What was that supposed to mean? He isn't from here. Despite being a demigod from a family of fourth epic angels, she couldn't make sense of the man's words. Are the blessed of the gods so beloved? To receive stories of the place of origin of them, Marich found himself at a loss for words. His gaze then shifted to his companion. Sharon returned it, and he received a soft but tense nod. Nodding back, Marich frowned at his leader. "Just tell us what to do, Mr. Adrian." Smiling at the duo, Adrian quickly walked to a black stone basin beside them. "Then open the gate for me. We need to make this quick." Nodding to his boss, Marich sped to the gate, clenching his fist, prepared to strike it, but his partner's hand stopped him. "Wait, look," Sharon said, glancing under the gate's lock, where white words in Hermes rose. "Filled square open gate, 500 points." With some hesitation, Marich unclenched his fist and slowly extended his hand. Dazedly, he watched as the white square glowed and the gate swung open. "Minus 500 points." Ignoring the message in red, Marich turned to his boss. "It's open." Nodding to the werewolf, Adrian looked down at the black stone basin with a purple flame floating in it. "Filled square turn into the beast. Let's see if I still have it." Without further ado, the red-haired man reached out his left hand and grasped the flame in a tight fist. A blue tattoo, similar to a scratched eye, glowed on the back of his hand, and he felt it burn. The next second, the colors in his vision saturated, and his arms transformed into luminous tentacles with luminous dots. Ads by PubFuture. Flora, who was still at his side, recoiled with wide eyes. "What the fuck?" No sooner had the red-haired man touched the purple flame than he had transformed into a hideous octopus monster with a huge mouth full of yellowish teeth and tentacles that gave off lightning sparks. Had he lost control? Ignoring his partner's reaction and the strange sensation in his body, Adrian turned around, and his left tentacle glowed with energy. Zap zap! A bolt of lightning shot out from the tentacles and directly hit a yellow panel above them, and the sound of machinery being activated filled the alleyway. A staircase began to descend from where the panel was, but the monster Adrian didn't see that. He smashed a false wall and a strange box on top of a carriage using his tentacles. Following that, it accelerated and leapt over a surprised Marich and Sharon and, with another bolt of energy, struck other panels that powered several different pieces of machinery. That done, the monster jumped off the railing and disappeared from their sight. They could hear it accelerating in the water. Single quote. Single quote. Everyone could only watch silently as all this happened, not quite understanding what had happened. I guess he was telling the truth when he said he had already practiced this. Marich mumbled as he turned to watch as the wooden planks were finally broken and zombies slowly crawled out of the windows. He frowned slightly. Unlike his zombies, who still maintained a human appearance with only their pale skin and unfocused eyes, these zombies were more similar to those of the Indulgence faction. With flesh eaten away by rotting, tattered, and bloody clothes, along with glowing yellow eyes. Marich was disgusted. So, walking up to the sluggish undead, he closed his fist and drove it full into its head. Plop, plus 130. A little surprised, Marich watched the now corpse fall to the ground. Killing them earns points, the pale man whispered, looking down at his fist for a moment. At that moment, the purple flame in the black stone basin pulsed, and in a greenish-black smoke, Adrian came out, shaking his head. Ah, that feels weird. It had been mentioned in the times he'd played the map with his brother, but he didn't think it was that weird. So what now, princess? Flora asked as she delivered a backkick, popping the head of another zombie that tried to sneak up behind her. I'm on it, Adrian replied with a sigh as he walked over to the first box he broke, grabbed a golden sphere with strange symbols covering it, and stowed it in his jacket. Walking up to the duo, who seemed to be having a good time killing zombies, Adrian walked past them but not before telling them to leave one behind. Now that he was in the junction, he took the opportunity to look around. Everything looked the same as in the game, except the vans had been swapped out for carriages, and there was no gobble gum machine. Arg, I really could have used a perkaholic. Adrian grumbled internally at losing such a helpful item. Noting that for later, the red-haired man bent down slightly and grabbed the slim box containing a luxurious golden fountain pen with his right hand. He grasped it no sooner than yellow portals with red tongues opened at his side. Adrian was not alarmed. He calmly straightened up with the fountain pen. His free hand burst into flames, and he whipped it behind him. A tongue of flame destroyed the guardians as soon as they emerged. Plus 20. Follow me, the ritual is faster with more people, Adrian said calmly as he walked past Marich and Sharon, who soon followed. Ads by PubFuture. Still in the background, Flora killed the second-to-last zombie with a graceful kick with her heel and watched him approach the duo. Watching him, she followed without saying much. They climbed the metal staircase to the rooftop and continued down the short hallway. Through a set of double doors, the group found themselves in a massive studio with a glass-ceilinged red and orange light fixture and an altar in the middle of the carpet over a red pentagram. The experienced Beyonders also noticed the numerous mystical ingredients set aside in various posters of a man with a long mustache. You don't need to kill the guardians that appear. Just stay together and walk in circles. Approaching the altar ritual, Adrian calmly mentioned as he placed the golden fountain pen on the altar. That done, he pulled the golden sphere from his jacket, whose blue symbols glowed for a moment, and placed it on the altar. The golden fountain pen glowed as soon as it was on top and rose up along with the sphere that left the red-haired man's hand. The next second, it opened, and a red light emerged. In the blink of an eye, a man appeared floating in the middle of the altar, looking alarmed. Numerous yellow portals with red tongues opened in the study, and another closed the exit. He wore an elegant white shirt with a red waistcoat decorated with gold details. His long black hair was slicked back, and he had a stylish mustache. What's going on? Where am I? This wasn't the deal, the man shouted in panic as he looked around. Pieces of the golden sphere flew around him with great speed. Adrian looked somewhat surprised at this, but his expression cooled. He turned away from the altar, turning his back on the man, and approached his team, who looked stunned at what was happening. Princess, what are you doing? Flora asked, walking up beside the redhead as more floating monsters appeared from the portals and followed slowly behind them. Aren't you going to help him? This world is in danger of destruction because of him, Adrian replied as he ignored the man's screams. Excuse me, Marich asked, somewhat surprised. What did he mean? the world was in danger of destruction. Was the difficulty of the tower so high this early? If that's the case, it makes sense why so few returned from it, Sharon thought, her calm gaze looking behind them at the Guardians. He, along with 4 other people, participated in a ritual that brought to this world a monster that plans to devour it. In the game my lord showed me, he murdered his wife along with sacrificing his manager at the very altar where he is now. Do not feel sorry for him. This world is in danger because of him. The least he can do is die to save it, Adrian explained, looking sideways at the werewolf. Looks like we took his place, and now it's up to us to fix his mistakes. Understood. A tense nod was all Marich could give, ignoring the man's shouts as best he could. No, stop, no, arg. In a final, bloody scream, the man's body exploded in a shower of blood that stopped in midair and condensed in the middle into the reformed sphere, along with a strange glowing blue worm with yellowish eyes. With his death, the portals, along with the Guardians, disappeared, and the exits reopened. Plus 500. Grabbing the sphere again along with the larva, Adrian looked at his team with a cold stare. We still have to do another 3. On the second one a huge monster will appear. How many points do you have? Just raise your wrist. I have 1020. I have 1300, Marich replied, looking at the white number on his wrist. 1700, Sharon said. 1600, nodding, Adrian turned around and started walking towards the stairs. I will buy the first door, and the next will be Flora. After that, it will be Marich and Sharon. What does the red number below the points mean? Marich consulted, looking at his wrist as they walked forward. That's the round we're in. Now it's round 1. Once we kill the last zombie, it'll be 2 and so on. We'll keep the wretch alive for a while, there's no need to kill it now. With each round, the zombies will get stronger, and more will appear. We'd better do this quickly and efficiently. We will go safely, Adrian replied seriously, returning to the junction. The group quickly moved to a lone gate in the left corner, a white sign with black lettering in Hermes red, Canal District. The Canal District smelled as he expected, but after his experiences in East Borough, the red-haired man would say it didn't smell that bad. This city had a better drainage system, and the smell was pretty much non-existent despite having a canal running through it. It was tolerable compared to more normal areas when he was still Joa. How are your powers? Adrian asked as he walked through the district's passages. In the distance, there was a pink glow. I can't transform, and my strength is reduced even further. I'm a little stronger than a prisoner, the gothic-dressed Sharon replied, looking behind her at the lone zombie following them in the distance, barely out of the alley. Same here, Marich commented, looking around at the strange structure of this even stranger city. Flora, most are still in place, but my strength and abilities are that of a marauder, and no matter how hard I try, I can't get into any of these buildings. The suppressed demi-goddess complained, looking bitterly to the side. How could a demigod of the path who specialized in stealing be unable to enter a building? Adrian listened curiously to that. Maybe it's the case of the ungenerated map. That's why she can't enter because there's nothing to enter. It was the same with him. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get through the doors by jumping over them or going around them. What about you, princess? Jacob asked her own question, trying not to dwell on her failure. My physical abilities are a bit superior to a hunter, and my fire consumes too much spirituality. I doubt I'll be able to cast anything more than a simple torrent or a small fire spell. Adrian responded with a click of his tongue. Even after using some of his power earlier, his spirituality had not recovered. Knowing that relying on his pyromania to save himself and his team would only kill them, he made up his mind. As soon as we complete this ritual, we'll return to the junction and buy a weapon. Flora looked at him as if he had grown an extra head. I didn't see any gunsmiths around this place, princess. Where will we get weapons? The redhead pointed to a simple chalk drawing on the opposite wall. They look like drawings, but they're enchanted. If you have enough points, you can buy a weapon. Luckily, that held up. Otherwise, it would have been tricky to kill the Margwa. The redhead added in his heart, remembering the drawing of a shotgun back in the junction. They kept some of their strength, but in return, they showed up without weapons, which he honestly would have preferred. A revolver would have been safer than trying to kill the Margwa with his bare hands. This way, Adrian called, heading down a flight of stairs to the canal. Being experienced beyonders, They didn't mind that the dirty water reached up to their ankles. In keeping with her noble teaching, Flora lifted the edges of her dress to keep it from getting wet. Sharon's dress was not long, so it was unnecessary for her. Walking to the side of the stairs to a small open compartment in the wall which he had opened during his transformation, Adrian bent down and grabbed a detective's badge. No sooner had it been removed from the compartment where it rested than more of those portals opened. The guardians exited quickly, and Adrian promptly dealt with them. The red-haired man paused for a moment before moving forward and looked up. His eyes quickly found a thin blue line rising in the dark city sky. That should be the theater. Nodding to himself, he continued. With +20 in his pocket, the group continued along the canal and up another staircase. Now, a gate stood in front of them, and behind it, a building loomed. Bright pink lights poured out of open windows, giving this dark place a wicked and lustful air. Is that a brothel? Flora asked, somewhat surprised. Usually, that kind of establishment was designed to be discreet and avoid attention. But this place seemed to have mixed the message and read backward. Morgue City is known for its high crime and seen sins in the game world, Adrian replied as he turned to look at Flora. He pointed to the closed gate with his head, and the noblewoman frowned. -1.500. Approaching another of those black stone basins with the strange purple flame, a massive box with more strange symbols was behind it. Adrian turned to his group and pointed his hand towards the balcony beside him. I need one of you to transform into the beast and activate the mechanism by electrocuting it behind it. Then destroy this box behind me, swing over, and open the door. His hand moved, pointing to a structure further away where something could be grabbed. Explaining well what needed to be done, Adrian laughed a little and added. Ads by PubFuture. You just need to grab the flame. Don't worry, it doesn't hurt. Also, we'll all have to transform later, so might as well do it now and get used to it. I'll do it, Sharon offered, taking a graceful step forward. The rest stepped back, giving the lady in the black dress some room. Her deep blue eyes gazed into the purple flame. She closed them momentarily and grasped the flame. As soon as her hand made contact, the same strange tattoo glowed on her hand, and her body was covered in greenish-black smoke that lasted only an instant. In the blink of an eye, that strange octopus monster with glowing tentacles stood in Sharon's place. This creature raised the electrified tentacle and pointed it at the spot its leader had shown it earlier. Zap zap, the electricity shot out and struck the almost hidden panel, and the sound of machinery being activated rang through the place. That done, the monster turned around and, with a mighty blow, destroyed the large box, revealing a strange statue of an octopus. The creature only looked at it before darting off in the direction it was shown before. What kind of creature is that? Marich asked, looking at the ominous statue whose empty eyes seemed to follow him. One that the least you know about, the better, was all the red-haired man said as he waited for the ghost to return. After about 20 seconds, the flame that had been touched flickered for a moment, and out of the same greenish-black smoke came Sharon, who opened her blue eyes and nodded. It is done. Good job. How are you feeling? I wish the transformation to werewolf had been as gentle as this one. Sharon replied with some wistfulness, remembering old times. Nodding, the group walked up the new stairs into the brothel. As soon as they walked through the door, they first noticed the huge amount of purple and red. The carpets, tables, and chairs were all in one of those two colors. A small bar to the right, with a few chairs lying down. It all gave the impression that there was a big party here. Which only made the blood that covered the floor and furniture stand out even more. There were several traces of someone being dragged and several bloody hands on the floor. Adrian's group knew there was no need to ask what had happened here. A staircase at the bottom led them to the first floor, where another altar rested. The detective's badge and sphere were placed on top. The ritual began again, but this time, it was a different person, a man wearing a brown glabella and hat and sporting a thick mustache. What the fuck, Shadow Man, what is the meaning of this? We did what you told us. The room was sealed again, the stairs were cut, and more fire portals appeared everywhere. Like last time, they stood together, moving in circles, generating a train that never caught up with them and ignored the detective's cries for help. Finally, the man's agony was cut short when his body exploded in a shower of blood that condensed inside the golden sphere, and beside him, the same glowing worm descended. +500. Marich quickly grabbed it, stowing the strange creature in his brown waistcoat with a frown and ignoring the squirming in his chest. No sooner had the worm left the altar than a purple light appeared above it, glowing brightly and making a noise not unlike a gas leak or a kettle. "We're leaving," Adrian ordered, pointing to the staircase, and the group accelerated. Descending to the first floor, the group was about to reach the entrance when the gas output peaked. Thump! A sudden huge weight was above them, the wood creaked and the whole building seemed to shake. Flora turned in alarm, her experience whispering to her, "What is that?" "Margwa. Big guy, ugly as shit and with 3 heads. Don't let him get you." Adrian responded by speeding down the stairs. The group ran with speed to the colorful junction. Wasting no time, the red-haired man ran towards a wrecked tea barber shop that had a chalk drawing on its door. The red-haired man raised his wrist and quickly saw his points. Filled square 540. Ads by PubFuture. I'm 210 short. Clicking his tongue, Adrian said as he watched a ball of purple smoke approach them from where they came. Thinking momentarily, the redhead turned and smiled at the black-clad Sharon. "Miss Casper, would you be so kind? I just have to touch it. Just touch it, the rest will come." Following the man's words, she walked over to the wall. Placing her hand on the door, the newly earned points were spent. In an instant, the chalk drawing on the door materialized in the woman's hands. It was a barrel shotgun, and she expertly loaded it. The werewolf looked surprised at the weapon in her hands, her movements unsettling her slightly. It was as if the knowledge of how to use it correctly had been implanted in her brain as soon as she touched it. As if it were a potion. "What kind of shotgun is that?" Marich asked at its strange design, looking nothing like anything he had ever seen. "It is as if it came from the future." Adrian looked at it sideways, smiling at the sight of his favorite weapon of the entire game in all its glory, "That, my good undead furry friend. It's the good KRM, or as I prefer to call it, the Margwa killer." He then turned his attention back to Sharon, who walked forward, pointing the shotgun at the ball of billowing purple smoke already in front of them. "Aim for the head when it opens its mouth. Only in those moments is it vulnerable," Adrian recommended as he stepped back, his hand igniting into flames and a dagger forming in his hand, much smaller than the ones he usually created. "Understood," Sharon replied in a cold voice, her cheek resting on the butt of the weapon. The ball of purple smoke emitted a white glow before a giant creature suddenly appeared a few meters before them. This was a creature very similar to the ones Sharon and Adrian had transformed into, only much larger and more robust. If the aforementioned transformation was an adolescent, this was certainly an adult. It was a 3-headed monster bearing tentacles. It was a grayish pig color with 4 spines on its back. Its height was easily 2.50 meters. It opened one of its 3 heads, piles of sharp, yellowish teeth, and a ghastly yellowish glow from the back of its throat. Bam! Plop! Amidst green blood and chunks of flesh and muscle, one of the heads exploded in a spectacle of gore. A giant insect shot out from among these pieces, but before it could get away, a dagger of fire destroyed it. "You keep destroying the heads, I'll take care of the parasites," Adrian said to Sharon from a distance, another dagger in his hand. "How much do you know about this place?" Flora queried, watching beside the redhead as the woman fought. Behind them, Marich distracted the last zombie by moving it in medium circles. "Very much so. My lord loves this game, so we play it often." Adrian winked at the white-haired woman, who stiffened for a moment and looked at the man in disbelief. Did the gods have those kinds of hobbies too? The Margwa writhed in pain, letting out a resounding cry of pain from its remaining heads. Its tentacles writhing in all directions, leaving a few gashes in the ground from its tantrum. Moving the slide, Sharon did not take her cold gaze off the monster. She quickly moved from her previous spot a few meters ahead, passing by one of the free sides the monster did not cover. It only took the Margwa a few moments before it stopped writhing and lunged at the werewolf at great speed. One of its mouths opened. Sharon, with speed, spun around, shotgun already raised. The smoking barrel barely moved from its place before she pulled the trigger again. Bam! Plop! Again, another head exploded, and another parasite flew from the destroyed head but was again destroyed by a dagger of orange fire. The gothic-dressed Sharon repeated the same move as before, circling the creature who after recovering again assaulted, but as soon as it opened its last mouth a shotgun blast was all it received, the last parasite following seconds later. For the last time, the creature twisted before falling to its knees with a thunderous thump. Then it fell flat on the ground. But before its huge body hit the ground, it disappeared in greenish smoke with yellow flashes. Only a grotesque heart, similar to rust in color, was left floating in midair in the place where it was. It was as big as an adult's head and had several orange lumps throbbing in it. A gloved hand grabbed the grotesque heart and stuffed it into a jacket. Turning to look at his team, Adrian smiled and murmured, "It's a surprise that will help us later." Laughing a little at the reference no one caught, he turned to look at Sharon, who was loading the shotgun. She had a thoughtful look on her face. "Well, how's it feel?" After loading the last round and moving the slide, the goth woman paused for about 5 seconds before nodding slightly. "It's fun. You have good taste." The redhead laughed a little more before looking at the other 2 closed gates. "All right, we'll go up one round here before we continue. Sharon, I recommend you use only melee for more points. Same for everyone, we'll save the bullets for the margwas and parasites. They are tougher than before. If you're not careful, you can easily get overwhelmed." Marich commented as they walked around a boxing ring that in the middle had the altar above the bloody pentagram. Floating above it was a tall, shirtless, rather muscular man with bandaged hands. Like the one before him, his pleas for help were ignored. Behind them, a small horde of guards followed, not too fast and not too slow. But slow enough that they did not catch up with the quartet's brisk walk. "I told you," Adrian said without looking at him, his gaze focused on his wrist, on the white and red numbers. Points. 1630. Round 2. When we complete the ritual, this will be enough to do the 2 laps on the tram and buy the shotgun. All that's missing is the points to upgrade it." Nodding in satisfaction, the red-haired man lowered his arm, and the numbers disappeared. "Before we do the last of the rituals we'll take a short trip, there's something we need to collect first." "Oh, and what would that be, princess?" Flora asked curiously, her hands clasped gracefully under her stomach. "A code to obtain an egg," Adrian replied casually. His answer earned stares from the group. "Really, an egg?" Flora asked, not sure she heard him correctly. "What would they do with it?" "An omelette." Adrian nodded without changing his expression. Suddenly, his eyes widened slightly, remembering something. "We have to heat it, by the way. Could you play mother hen?" Knowing that her partner just wanted to get on her nerves, the Jacob relaxed her expression and looked straight ahead. Her ears fell on deaf ears. Laughing softly, Adrian said no more, already satisfied with teasing his favorite worm a little. After a while, the ritual was complete, with the fighter's body explosion and the appearance of a new grub, this time grabbed by Sharon. Leaving the abandoned gym, the group went up the way they came, with the redhead in the lead. They passed the last zombie, who had only a torso and was slowly crawling towards them. Arriving at the small platform where Marich had used the basin stone to transform into the beast, the group climbed up the ladder to the side of it. Arriving at a much smaller train station, Adrian walked calmly to the control panel and pressed a green button. "This will only take a few moments. Now, things will be quiet for a while, so if you have any questions, you can ask." Leaning against the wall with his shoulder, he crossed his arms, bored. "Is there another way to complete the floor other than the ritual?" Marich asked, looking out the broken window at the slowly moving legless zombie. "No, without the ritual, we would just be left fighting ever larger and stronger hordes of zombies until we are outnumbered. The only way to win is the ritual," Adrian replied, looking at the bloody map of the city in front of him, which had the ritual locations marked on it. "Is there no end to them?" Sharon asked, her hands folded elegantly in her lap as she sat atop a crate, her posture not unlike a doll, the shotgun resting on her back. Adrian nodded. "The rounds are endless. That's why I said it's useless to kill as many zombies as appear, it'll be easiest just to kill the number needed to advance." "Then we were lucky you're with us, princess. I can't imagine anyone doing all this without knowing anything beforehand," Flora commented, standing at the man's side. "Be thankful this is one of the easier ones. If it had been any other game, we'd have to worry about probability and luck." Snorting a little, the redhead barely held back the urge to click his tongue. Completing Moon's Easter egg on solo had been a headache he'd rather not remember. The group looked at the man, curious at his sudden display of clear discomfort. They had an idea why. Everyone had an experience with it, some worse than others. Whenever something depended on probability and luck, it was almost a given that it would fail. At that moment, the rails at the side of the hut where they stood began to vibrate loudly. Something was coming. Looking up from the zombie still crawling upwards, Wach saw something like a train coming from above the tracks. Ads by PubFuture. What's that? The werewolf narrowed his eyes in confusion but still alerted the group, who came over to look. Sigh. Finally, Adrian said in relief as the machine stopped at the side of the hut they were in. The previously closed doors opened, revealing a glass interior that allowed them to see everything below them. Stepping through them, the red-haired man pulled a lever and pressed the green button on the side again. -500. The doors closed, and followed by a hiss, the machine began to move at a decent speed over the abandoned and bloody streets of the city. Is this some kind of tram? Flora asked, looking out of the window at the passing buildings. More or less, it's more like a monorail. A sort of flying train if you like. Adrian replied, looking out his window to the right. Raising a hand, he pointed to the window of a building whose open window was giving off a soft crimson glow. Keep an eye out for open windows that glow like that. Inside are some symbols we'll need later, so get them in your heads. The group nodded, each taking one of the several windows in the place and peering intently outside. Mr. Adrian, once you place that sphere on the altar, the people who appear keep mentioning a shadow man. Who is he? Sharon consulted sideways, her gaze calmly scanning the city outside the monorail. Adrian did not answer the question and only looked out the window. His silence was answer enough for those present. Ever since they began moving through Morgue City and completing the rituals, his mind had been thinking about that human-looking thing. Normally, at the beginning of each round, he would have been on the fire escape in that alley watching them, but when they awoke, no one was there. Adrian had a theory as to why. Considering that every protagonist we've sacrificed has mentioned his name, it's certain that they showed up at the beginning and explored a bit. They found out who he was, but before they could start with the rituals, we came along and replaced them. It's certain he's watching us right now. But he's not doing anything because we are completing the rituals like he wants. It was implied several times and explicitly stated that these creatures could see humans without them noticing but could not interact with them. For that, they would have to manifest. There were several possible reasons why he would not have manifested to them. Distrust of these new arrivals and analyzing them to know what to do, finding the right moment to attack them. But there was something else. Adrian also noticed several things missing. One of them was almost all the perks. Only Quick Revive was there, and all the rocket shield parts were missing. It's like there's a bug on the floor. Shuddering slightly at the mention of the bug, the redhead went into cogitation. It was no time to think about crows that had nothing to do with it now. It was better to leave those things to their games. There could be several things that could go wrong, so Adrian had never separated them apart to transform into the beast to open the map. While he knew what he had to do and everything was going on just like in the game, at least the parts that still worked, he wasn't stupid. This was real life, not some stupid game he played with his brother on a school night when they had a test the next day. One mistake, one oversight, one miscalculation would mean they all died. What did it matter that he could revive? He had no idea of the actual requirements of that, only that he had to die and he shouldn't die often. And he also didn't know what would happen to his body once he died in the tower. Did dying mean failing the floor? And if so, what would happen next? For him this was never a game, this new life never was. A few moments later, the monorail took them back to the Canal District. After waiting a while for it to load, the red-haired man pulled the lever again and paid 500 points for another trip. With the last trip over and the last symbol obtained, the group got off the monorail and found themselves in another hut like the ones they had been in. Descending the stairs of this one, the group found themselves amid disaster. Carriages lay all over the square, making it difficult to move around. Dead and half-decayed horses gave off a putrid smell of decay. Ads by PubFuture. In one corner of the area was a long, mysterious box made of what appeared to be sea stone, with a mold to accompany it. It emitted a watery, greenish glow. Tentacles covered its entire body, and a shadowy octopus rested in the middle, its eyes glowing malevolently. Adrian glanced at it and moved along with his party, who didn't even blink at it. With Wach paying for the door and Flora being the one to transform this time, the last unique item was acquired, a hairpiece. With everything ready, the group returned to the shattered and bloody square. They made their way around the edges, avoiding the wrecked carriages, to the theater at the back of the square. No, no, it was not supposed to end like this. I would be a star. Arg, a beautiful blonde woman wearing a red corset cried out in pain before exploding in a torrent of blood. With the ritual over and Flora grabbing the last worm they needed, Sharon quickly dealt with the Margwa that appeared. With the extra points and on the redhead's recommendation, the rest bought the same shotgun. That done, the group returned to the canal district. Descending the stairs to the water, they continued a little further until they came to the false wall from before. This revealed a small empty room, the only thing in it was a yellow crack in the air that hovered ominously. Without wasting any time, Adrian touched this crack, which in a second contracted into a ball before expanding further than before and opening up, revealing a black sky with hints of blue and full of stars. The red-haired man looked at this with some discomfort. Thinking a little, he turned to his group. I want to try something. Come on. After a while, the group returned. Between his hands and well away from his body, Adrian was carrying the torso-less zombie. With his hunting skills, it had been no problem to find the slippery bastard. Okay, dear, you have no idea how much I appreciate you doing this for me, Adrian whispered to the zombie, who was whipping his arms around and trying to grab him. Hiya, right, don't worry, it's safe. He paused a bit, I think, but that's what you're here for. He finished happily, earning another scream from the zombie. Gaga, taking that as a yes, Adrian laughed some more and threw the legless torso. He didn't do it hard enough to avoid killing it. The zombie twisted in the air for a moment before colliding with the portal. Its body barely made contact and disappeared in a small orange flash. Will it even work? It's a zombie. It's dead, Flora consulted, looking sideways, ignoring how he had spoken to it while it tried to eat his face. They may be dead, but in theory, they're also alive. Him going in is the same as us going in, Adrian replied, his hands lighting on fire to clean off the grime. He may have been wearing gloves, but touching something dead and rotting didn't feel right. Of course, speaking through his left hand, his right was mute. Is there any danger? Sharon consulted, staring deeply into him with her blue eyes. Depending on whether our second favorite undead friend returns or not. He hoped his new friend would return. Otherwise, he would have to try the other portals. The conversation between the companions was interrupted when the portal gave off a small orange-yellow flash. Out of it came the zombie, crawling with screams of hatred and leaving a snail-like trail. Smiling, Adrian grabbed the remains of the zombie's shirt collar and stared at it. Finding no mutation or exaggerated belly, the red-haired man chuckled a little. I'd kiss you if you had lips. Mustering a little more strength, he threw the flailing zombie over his shoulder, whose mangled body fell into the dirty water. Turning to his team, he smiled at them and winked, let's go. Following his instructions, and to the displeasure of some, they grabbed each other's hands with their eyes closed. Adrian led the way, followed by Marich and Sharon. The werewolf extended a hand to the woman in the purple dress. Flora watched this before snorting slightly and ignoring the outstretched hand completely. She walked to the front. I'll go first, she said, grabbing Adrian's only free hand, who only gave an apologetic look to the expressionless Sharon. After 4 short flashes, the canal district was empty once more, with only the zombie slowly crawling to the portal. Hiya, feeling his feet finally touch the ground, Adrian was almost as quick to open his eyes as the hand that released his. His scarlet eyes glanced momentarily at an expressionless Flora before smiling slightly and releasing Marich's hand. Please don't take it to heart, Miss Casper. Miss Worm does not like to be touched. Sharon nodded simply at his words. Her face always expressionless and serene, she looked around at where they were with a hint of curiosity. They were now in an abandoned and somewhat crumbling train station. The 2 exits were covered with huge boulders, and more than half of a carriage was buried in rubble. A lone carriage atop the rusted black rails only added to the air of abandonment. She also saw one of those big boxes with the statues on the carriage's side. Another of those strange basin stones with the purple flame rested next to the stairs to the next floor. And the wall opposite them was covered with strange mystical symbols that pulsed crimson like a heart. Is that where we have to go now? It may have been obvious, but she preferred to ask the professional. Adrian followed where the werewolf was looking and nodded. Yes, that's where it is, but first, I'd rather we do one thing. Walking over to the basin stone, the red-haired man grabbed the mysterious flame and, through the greenish smoke, became the beast. quickly moving to stand in front of an innocuous brick arch in the wall. Its left tentacle fired 3 bolts of electricity. As soon as the third struck, the bricks burned like paper, revealing a hidden altar. On it were 4 swords stuck almost to the hilt, and where the handguard would have been, a strange white egg, easily fit in one's hand, was in its place. After doing so, Beast Adrian turned around and destroyed the box on the side of the wagon, revealing another one of those octopus statues. Then, he quickly moved up the stairs to the next floor. In the distance, the sound of more electric bolts being fired echoed through the station. As the boss did what he had to, the group turned their attention to the secret altar. Flora squinted at the curious eggs as she read the strange inscriptions on the swords, revealed handles. Her instinct as a cryptologist called her to try to decipher them, but she ignored them. What kind of eggs are those? Marich squinted his eyes, observing the curious objects better. He noticed that on the surface, they seemed to be covered in something resembling scales. A reptile, just call it an egg, its real name is an annoying tongue twister, Adrian replied, already in his body, grabbing one of the eggs. Tossing it up and down, he whistled a little. Despite their size, they were quite a bit heavier than they looked. If he threw it at someone's head, he was sure it would knock them out. Putting aside his thoughts, he walked over to the statue of the tetric octopus and placed the egg on one of the 4 outstretched tentacles. As soon as the cold skin of the egg made contact, the tentacle curled around it and held it firmly. Out of sheer curiosity, he tried to pull them apart, but no matter how much force he put into it, it wouldn't budge. Okay, it works. Everyone, grab an egg and put it here. Once we do that, we'll do the second to last ritual. Adrian said as he grabbed his shotgun from his back. Sharon was next to grab one and place it on the statue, her gaze revealing nothing. Marich followed, with Flora being the last. The group finally moved to the front of the illuminated wall. Like the brick archway, the symbols glowed and pulsed brighter than before. Then, the wall burned like paper, revealing a huge hidden room. An altar, like the previous ones, stood a few steps in front of them. Ahead was a huge black crack, impossible to jump over, separating the room in 2. The walls on either side were crumbling along with what, at one point, must have been a bridge. At the end of the bridge was a huge circular statue. Tentacles of stone covered it and disappeared into the walls behind it. In the corners, there were more of those black stone basins. But there was no purple flame on it. There was nothing else here besides that. Only the passing of time in the crumbling parts of this abandoned hall and the feeling of the fantastic before this ancient structure. The group also felt it in the back of their minds. As soon as the door opened, a chilling sensation was born deep inside them. It felt like they were being watched by hundreds of invisible eyes that seemed to be watching them from beyond, an unknown place. But in the whole place, there was nothing. Everyone seeing this place thought the same thing. They were not supposed to be here. Ads by PubFuture. Without opening his mouth, Adrian raised his left hand while keeping his right on the handle of the shotgun. His hand signaled for them to move forward. Squeezing the shotgun tighter in his hands, Adrian opened his senses and walked alertly to the basin stone. Keeping away from the vast crevice. Calmly, he pulled the fluorescent worm from his jacket and placed it on the basin stone. With a resounding gong, the worm was suspended like the purple flame, and from the deep abyss emerged huge chunks of stone pulled by an invisible force. While that was happening, the group had already moved on to the next and placed the next worm, Marich's worm. A gentle tap on his shoulder caused Adrian to look at Flora, who pointed at the newly repaired wall. The woman's eyes glinted curiously. Scarlet eyes followed the finger, and the man's gaze froze momentarily. Now repaired, it revealed a mural of old, green bronze. Many parts were ruined, the repair failing to save it, but what little survived made his eyes narrow. These greenish bronze mural, such a sea stone, depicted a scene. A robed figure stood before what appeared to be a clearing, the details too ruined to make Adrian feel it was the right thing to say. This figure held a book in its hand, it seemed to be covered in eyes, looking everywhere. This figure was standing towards the gaping aperture, its free hand pointing with an open palm. From the shadow cast by the figure, multiple open eyes were staring directly at them. That wasn't what it showed in the original. Adrian took a closer look at the eyes in the figure's shadow. He felt a great familiarity with them but also a strange unfamiliarity. He recognized it, but it was also strange to him, it was bizarre. The true creator. With a shudder, the red-haired man looked up at the robed figure, and the realization hit him. That figure was not similar to any that had been described in the original story. It was neither the Wind Angel nor the White Angel. None of the descriptions came close to the figure. So that left only one possible one in his mind. The Angel of Silver. At that moment, the opposite wall was completely repaired, and he quickly turned his attention to this one. If the state of the previous one was horrible, this one was worse. The mural was almost completely ruined. Only bits and pieces showed a story that was difficult to understand. As far as Adrian could make out, the surviving pieces depicted what appeared to be a great battle. He could see the earth breaking up and what appeared to be explosions going off. However, the battle participants were impossible to discern due to the mural's state. For a moment, the red-haired man felt that this was out of place and returned his attention to the mural with the robed figure. His eyes narrowed slightly. He's facing whatever's on the mural. Putting the two murals as one piece, that was all he could think of when he saw it. The redhead could only curse that the opposing mural was so ruined. His shoulder was taped again, and the redhead returned his attention to Flora. The woman's lips moved soundlessly. Can you feel it? It took him a moment to understand her words, but he didn't have to look any further. I do. Adrian nodded, his lips moving, but no sound came out. The feeling of being watched was gone. From one moment to the next, that tetric attention had vanished. Contrary to feeling calmer for it, Adrian gripped the shotgun tighter. When the forest fell silent, a predator was in the area. I'll go first. Whispering to the trio, Adrian carefully approached the edge of the chasm but did not lean out, staying 3 steps away. Carefully, he ran his left hand along the mural and felt a force draw him to it, but it wasn't very strong. Ads by PubFuture. So that's how they could do it. It's like a weak magnet. Nodding, the red-haired man took a few steps back. Before anyone could stop him, he sped up and jumped. His feet connected with the wall, and he ran along it. After a short run, he took one last big leap and ended up on the other side. Turning around to the stunned looks of the group, he raised his hand and shook it in amusement, his heart pounding. Come on, this guy. Flora grumbled as Marich was the next to follow the man. Her gaze shifted to her feet and she could only sigh in frustration. Why had she chosen to wear this dress as the last clothes she would wear before she lost her body? Sighing, the Jacob could only take a step back and accelerate up the wall. She met up with the rest of the group with a great leap. With everyone on the other side, the 2 remaining worms were placed on the last stone basin. More stones came out of the abyss, merging in front of them, repairing the bridge. Using the repaired bridge, the group returned to the altar. Wasting no more time, Adrian pulled the golden sphere from his jacket and placed it on top. The symbols glowed blue for an instant before it began to float. As soon as the golden sphere was placed on top, all the worms glowed instantly before firing a beam of orange energy that curved around a single point, the circular statue. Multiple portals of tongues of flame opened throughout the hall. More of the guardians began to emerge as everything started to shake, dust and stones falling from the ceiling. The same strategy they used with the previous rituals was applied. Oddly enough, at the most open spot, the newly rebuilt bridge, the group began to train the guardians. Once we do this, I will assume the next thing is to fill the eggs we grabbed earlier, Flora said, glancing occasionally at the mural to her right. That's what's next. It'll take a while, but everything will be faster from then on. Adrian grunted a little. These parts were always tedious to him. And how would we fill them? Marich broke into the conversation, keeping an eye on the guards behind them. By using the zombies. Every time we kill them in the vicinity of the statues, their souls will be sucked into the eggs until they are filled. We'll do that with each statue until they glow, and we can take out the swords. Sounds tedious, Sharon commented in a calm voice. At her words, Adrian chuckled softly. And it is. The group circled the rodeo they were participating in for a while longer. Then suddenly, the tremors grew stronger, to the point that it seemed as if the roof would fall on them. The meaning was clear. As with the previous rituals, the present one was nearing completion. Crack, crack, the circular statue at the back of the hall began to crack, fissures rapidly moving all over its body, and these emitted a faint celestial light. Is this even safe? Flora shouted, trying to find her balance. Even with Marauder's control, she found it somewhat difficult. Sort of. Adrian shouted with a knee and hand on the ground. Damn it! Marich and Sharon stood nearby, their wobbling forms drawing a chuckle from the man. At that moment, the statue shattered, and the shaking stopped instantly. The guards disappeared, and the exit opened. The red-haired man clenched the shotgun in his hands. As did the entire group, they raised their weapons to the front at a single target. A tall figure in black robes had come into view floating above the altar. In one pale hand, the golden sphere floated. With an invisible wind, the robe moved somberly. The face beneath the robe was blackened, showing nothing but emptiness. That's not the Shadow Man. Adrian gritted his teeth, his finger not separating from the trigger. Like the murals, the final boss had changed too. The mysterious figure stared at them for only a few seconds, but despite being faceless, the weight of its gaze was felt deep in their spirits. Before they could do anything, the figure disappeared in blackish-purple smoke along with the golden sphere. In the next instant, multiple yellow spheres appeared around the room, and in the blink of an eye, multiple Margwa appeared.